If I can call the committee to order, this is the penultimate session in our fast fashion inquiry. Can I welcome our guests and witnesses here this morning? For the purposes of Hansard, can you please introduce yourself, starting from my left?
Mike Barry, Director of Sustainable Business at Marks & Spencer.
Leanne Wood, Chief People, Strategy and Corporate Affairs Officer at Burberry.
Jamie Beck, Head of Supply Management at the Arcadia Group.
And Paul Lister, responsible for ethical trade and sustainability at Primark.
Thank you all very much indeed for being with us here this morning. Throughout our inquiry, there's been a recurring theme, and that theme is the issue of the fashion industry chasing the cheap needle around the planet. And we've been very concerned by the conditions that your garment workers are living in and working in. Mr. Barry, Marks & Spencer's Plan A has long been seen as a shining example of corporate responsibility. So can you explain why you're not part of the International Garment Workers Union's, the Industrial's initiative for better standards in your supply chain?
Thank you for the question, and just to sort of reassure you, human rights at the heart of buying hundreds of millions of garments around the world from thousands of factories. Just been benchmarked 4th out of 101 in the Corporate Human Rights Benchmark, Best Modern Day Slavery Statement in British Business in the FTSE 100. Put that to one side, let's answer that direct question. We've been working now for decades in the world of ethical trade, working with ETI, working with SEDEX to understand what's truly happening in supply chains. We work in lots of different initiatives. Not every single one that's put in front of us do we need to work with. So we keep talking with all these initiatives. We keep understanding what difference they could possibly make to the journey that we're on. Very respectful. No one's going to solve this journey on their own. That's why this panel is so very, very important. But I think on this very specific initiative, we decided that we can move things forward through the existing partnerships we've got. But we will keep watching them, though.
Well, you talk about SEDEX, but that's essentially the fashion industry marking its own homework, isn't it? You do an audit, and then once they're on your suppliers list, you don't check second and third tier factories, do you?
Well, we go beyond first tier. So let's be very, very clear about SEDEX. It's bringing together the audits done by multiple different businesses and multiple different factories. So by bringing the industry together, we're collectively sending a signal to the whole marketplace, all the producers, that these standards matter. So I think that's very, very important to say at the beginning. We know from work on things like modern day slavery that you have to go beyond tier 1. We're working now through tier 2, tier 3, right back to the cotton field as well. So in no way complacent, but I think I want to be very, very clear, we cannot take part in every single possible initiative out there. But we're totally committed to human rights in our supply chain.
It's funny that you're committed to human rights, and yet you don't want your workers to express their human right to freedom of association, collective bargaining, discussions around pay, overtime and working conditions. Isn't the best audit the audit that's taken by workers through their elected representatives in your factories? And isn't it the case that Marks & Spencer's doesn't recognise trade unions here in the UK, and once you realised the Act was about recognising trade unions in third countries, you couldn't be part of it?
Well, let's start with the first challenge there. For our 85,000 colleagues, work very, very closely with the business through business involvement groups. They have a really good voice in the direction of travel of the Marks & Spencer business.
But these are the garment workers you're talking about.
But you asked the question about our own employees. Let's be very clear, we work very closely with our workforce. Secondly, back down the supply chain, absolutely support freedom of association. So again, a transparency map on our website naming every food and clothing factory around the world we use, telling you whether they've got freedom of association in that factory or not. Nothing to hide. Absolutely support the need for freedom of association in supply chains. Absolutely, in terms of the audits that we do, we're working with worker representatives to understand the reality of what's going on in the factory. We're not naive. We know that people can be intimidated. We know that problems can be covered up. We go looking for them. But again, this is why you have to work in partnership with multiple other businesses to really get under the skin of the issues in supply chains. But I want to be very clear with you, human rights matters to us, freedom of association matters as well.
How many of your factories are unionised then?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I mean, the information's there on the website.
Don't you put it there? Don't you know?
I don't know personally, but it's up there. It's available in the public domain as to how much freedom of association is in our supply chain. And we're one of the few businesses in the world that do that.
I mean, isn't this SEDEX? Can you talk us through the audit process that SEDEX does? Because it's not clear to us. And one of the constant refrains that we have is that this is the industry marking its own homework, and that CSR we have you all here today from the social responsibility side, is the kind of add-on to give you permission to operate and basically to cover up the fact that your workers are getting paid maybe 10 cents for making a pair of jeans that you're retailing at £30.
Again, legitimate question. Let me just explain how we do it within the business. We have a very small team in the centre of business I lead, 10 people that do deliver the policy, strategy, overall partnerships within the business. Everything else is integrated into our business units, into our clothing business, into our food business, our retail business and logistics. They run these things day to day. And again, they have teams within local sourcing offices that work very, very closely with independent third-party auditors that check every factory every year. We share that information, again, through the SEDEX platform, constantly working with other businesses to understand the problems that they're identifying, we're seeing and working together. Again, I think we would too challenge the audit systems that we have today that can be better. And again, there's pieces of work going on from the Consumer Goods Forum, through the Ethical Trading Initiative, through SEDEX, to actually improve the audit system. None of us are complacent about this. But I do believe that we're finding the issues that matter and dealing with them.
How many factories have you pulled out out of working, and in which countries as a result of a SEDEX audit?
Over the last, what length of time?
Over the last 5 years?
It'll be a small number, and it's a small number for a very clear reason. We do not cut and run. If you find a problem, you stay, you put it right. The only reason we'd leave a factory is if we felt that that factory did not take seriously the problems that we'd found and were not willing to work with us to put them right. But if you find a problem, you stay and you put it right.
And how do you put it right if you don't know where the unions are and you don't know? I mean, you're relying on a third-party auditor. They come to you with a problem. There is no independent workplace voice, or you don't know whether you have trade unions or not. I mean, it doesn't sound very convincing, does it?
Well, let's be clear, we do know that we've got trade unions. I think all I'm saying today is that out of the thousands of factories we use, I can't give you a specific percentage today. But our teams on the ground know. And where they go into a factory, they will meet workers and workers' representatives in the process of the audit. That happens all the time.
Globally, less than 10% of garment workers are in a trade union. So that would probably be a similar percentage for your factories, would it not?
I think it's a higher figure. And I think in terms of freedom of association, again, trade unions are very, very important in this process. Let's be very clear, trade unions play a really important role in supply chains. But there's other ways of doing freedom of association as well.
And what are those ways? Because if they're sitting down with the management in the factory, then that actually acts as a block on workers' trade unions being set up, doesn't it?
Of course, and this is why we're working with other brands to share best practice on how workers can have a voice in the factory. Again, let's be clear, we've seen repeatedly in our own business and our food supply chain that when workers are well looked after, you get a business case. They're more productive, you have less absenteeism. It works. It's in our interest to support better labour rights in factories and supply chains.
You see, it worries me about Marks and Spencer's because, you'll be talking about your animal welfare, about happy cows, the quality of the turkeys, the hens that lay your eggs, and yet you can't tell us what is happening to your workers in second and third tier factories. Or you're saying that if you go and audit, that you find problems and then, you work to perhaps sort them out, but you're not sure. And, it doesn't sound like a proper system. In this digital age, what is stopping you from working with, the Global Garment Workers Union? You were involved with them in 2015, you pulled out in 2015. Why didn't you sign that memorandum of understanding?
I think I want to be very, very clear with you. We know where every factory is. We're auditing every factory. We're transparently putting on our website where every factory is. That's amongst the leading standards in the world. The Corporate Human Rights Benchmark gone through laboriously what we do in terms of human rights and found very, very high standards, 4th out of 101 in the world. I'm being very, very clear with you today as a panel. We're not complacent. We're not for 1 second saying that human rights is cracked. There isn't a better way of doing things. And I think we're also saying how respectful we are of the good work that trade unions do in those supply chains. But we can't take part in every single initiative that's put in front of us.
Well, we noticed the fact that of all the initiatives that you're taking part in, the one that involves independent scrutiny of what you're doing is the one that you're not part of. But I'm going to move on to Miss Wood. Burberry, you've got a very interesting approach to factories in Asia, and you refuse to supply from Cambodia, Bangladesh, and a couple of other countries. Can you tell us why that is?
Yes, we don't work with partners in those countries because we don't feel that we can be confident necessarily of the standards, and we can't audit or ensure them, and so we've made a choice not to operate in those countries.
What are the weaknesses in the audit systems in those countries that you've discovered?
It's beyond the audit system. We just at this present time don't feel confident that all of the things that we believe in our responsible business principles, that we would necessarily be able to find suppliers who would be able to commit that they could meet those standards.
Is this in particular about human slavery in Myanmar?
It's across a range of issues, actually. We very much are in favour of all the work that's happening around modern slavery. Our CEO was one of the founding members of the CEO group against modern slavery. We are recognised as one of the top 10 FTSE businesses in our reporting in this area, so it's certainly something that's hugely important to us.
And what about, have you considered going into the industrial ACT, the industrialisation, the industrial trade union for garment workers? Are you considering joining that initiative?
We will always look at and consider initiatives, very happy to do that. About 75% of the workers across our supply chain are covered by collective bargaining agreements. Again, our responsible business principles set out that we want to be able to ensure that people are able to access freedom of association. So we are always looking at associations that can help us further these goals.
You have a factory in Wakefield, in Castleford. Do you recognise trade unions in this country?
Our employees are free to join trade unions. We're the first luxury industry business to be accredited as a UK living wage employer. That's something that's hugely important to us. So we certainly support all of our employees to be able to join a union.
And do you recognise any trade unions?
We don't recognise them collectively, but we do have collective arrangements in place across many of our supply chain businesses.
In this country or overseas?
Our own manufacturing is in this country primarily, in Yorkshire, as you say, and we've also recently acquired a factory in Italy.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I move on now to Mr. Beck? Arcadia Group. You've been in the news recently, haven't you, with your boss? Allegations of racism, sexual harassment, bullying, belittling of senior management in the UK. How does having a boss like that affect the culture in your group with regards to workers' rights?
It doesn't affect us at all. We have a strong fashion footprint programme, an ethical trading programme, which we've had for many years. We have a core code of conduct that's implemented throughout our factories and throughout our supply chain. And we have an audit programme similar to other high street retailers to monitor that.
But if culture set from the top and the top management are being bullied and belittled by Philip Green, isn't that a problem for the culture throughout the organisation?
I'm not here to comment on that specifically. I thought we were here to talk about the supply chain and workers' rights.
Well, this is about workers' rights in this country. There's been reports of what Philip Green is alleged to have said to workers in this country. He sets the standard and the tone for your dealings with workers further down the chain, if you like.
So as I said, we've got a code of conduct, and that is in our conditions to trade in with our suppliers, and that's to meet the minimum standards throughout our supply chain. So
you are in the ACT initiative, is that correct?
That's correct.
What difference has that made to your supply chain?
At the moment, no direct impact. So at the moment, where ACT is at, so we're working with a number of trial countries, one in particular, where we're looking at what steps we can get to for a collective industrial agreement for wages in that sector. So I would say that there's strong progress being made.
Which country is that?
It's Cambodia.
Right, and that's particularly important around child labour, is it not?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Are there particular issues with child labour in Cambodia?
Not that I'm aware of.
There certainly have been in the past, because obviously after the killing fields, nobody had any documentation. So one of the things was the destruction of the administrative pillars of society. So that's taken a long time to rebuild. I was just wondering if that was an issue.
No.
Okay. And have you thought about going any further with ACT and signing up to a kind of global framework agreement, as ASOS have done?
Yes, we've always had a very good, strong working relationship with the ITG LWF, which then turned into industrial, and we've had a good, like I say, a really good, healthy working relationship where if they do find any concerns in the supply chain, then they come and talk to us, and we work with them and with other retailers to resolve any issues.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Lister, Primark is famous for its very cheap T-shirts. I mean, how can you justify selling, T-shirts in your stores for as little as £2 or £3? And how can you be making a profit on those?
I mean, that's a question that's often put to us, and I think it's because we look at our business model is slightly different from perhaps others. We do no advertising, so you'll have seen no billboards, no television advertising. Primark has never done any significant advertising at all, and that can save us in any year, I don't know, 150 million pounds compared to some of our larger rivals. That goes straight into price, so that keeps our pricing low. We then, our arrangements with our factories, we often buy on longer lead times, in quiet periods for the factories, and then we pay the factories early. So if you're a factory owner, you'll be able to give Primark a better price to reflect that. And then from the factory through to the store, we keep our costs to the absolute minimum. And then actually in the store, our margins are very tight. So actually our published margins are between 9 and 12%. So it's our business model that takes us to the £2 T-shirt.
You said in your response to us that you're a founding member of ACT, Action, Collaboration, Transformation on Living Wages, but you do not know of any child labour in your supply chain. Can you tell? I mean, that's one of those slightly ambiguous phrases, isn't it?
No, I mean, I sit here today and say I do not know of any child labour in our supply chain.
So,
I mean, we look. So
yeah.
I know of the risks of child labour. I've got a team of 110 people who are based predominantly in our sourcing countries around Asia, and we know the risks. We've got our code of conduct, as everybody has been referring to. Our code of conduct has a list of things we look for. One of those is child labour. Yeah. We do.
What's your definition of child? Is this anyone under 15?
Under 16. So 15
right.
and 16. But there are other. So we don't look to 14 in I think China has a 14 thing. We're looking. We define child labour.
So, can you just be clear? Nobody under the age of what age is employed in your factories?
Under 16.
And if I can come back to,
Can I just put? They're not
sure.
They're not our factories. They are just technically
suppliers.
They're supplier
yeah,
factories.
we understand that.
Sorry.
Thank you. But you're purchasing from them. If I can come back to Mr. Beck, you say there's no person under the age of 15 in your factories. So there's already a discrepancy there in terms of definition of child.
That's with our code of conduct, which mirrors that of the ETI and globally, really. So that's convened from ILO standards.
So one store says no one under 16, one store says no one under 15. But, I mean, obviously for a child...
It's the law within that country, but we've said as a minimum it's 15, and that's the same for all the high street retailers.
But it's not, because your colleague next to you has just said it's 16, so it's not the same for all high street retailers, is it?
I asked the colleague maybe to check his code of conduct, because they are the same.
Mr. Lister.
We will do that, but I think it's 16 in our code of conduct.
Okay, Mr. Barry, what's your definition of a child?
So let's start working down. Under 18, young people, you'll start taking a lot of due attention at 18, but people can work in there under 18. Most countries in the world would look at 16 then, and we would absolutely comply with the law of the land there. If it's 16, it's 16. In a small number of countries, 15 is acceptable. We would accept it in that context, provided the really good stringent controls in terms of what that young person is doing at the time. Okay, it is very, very, very rare but 15 very occasionally will happen in the supply chain.
Which countries?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head right now, but it will be a small number might be doing it, but you're talking tiny number.
We heard evidence of girls being bonded into 3 years of bonded labour by their parents in South India, 15 to 18, 14 to 17, in order to work for their dowry. Is India a country that you source
yes,
from?
Yes, we source for India, Bangladesh, we source from Cambodia, Vietnam. Again, being very clear, we understand the risks in these countries. We're constantly looking out for them. We work with local NGOs, local government officials to spot the risks all the time and communicating with each other as well. So again, we never turn around and say there's
local government officials. We say local government officials, like the ones that inspected the factories in Rana Plaza that then collapsed. I mean, the whole reason that Rana Plaza collapsed was because of corruption in the building standards there.
But I mean, let me be very clear, Marks and Spencer had nothing to do with Rana Plaza.
No,
but secondly, let me also then respond to that. You've got to listen to different people, and you triangulate. I will listen to trade unions, local NGOs, local government officials, other businesses and brands in that space. Everybody gives you a bit of intelligence to understand what's going on there. You have to be there and you have to be listening. I don't think anybody tells you the gospel truth. You have to be listening to everybody. The more you have people on the ground, the more you hear, the more you can actually share and respond to that.
I mean, you're very defensive about Rana Plaza, but any one of the three fast fashion brands sitting here could have been employing people in Rana Plaza, couldn't you?
We were in Rana Plaza.
You were in Rana Plaza.
So we had a supplier in Rana Plaza.
Yeah, and did you make what contribution did you make to the fund?
So we very early on in relation to Rana Plaza, we announced we were in Rana Plaza on the day that it collapsed, and very early on we started to provide food aid because people weren't being paid, and food became the most important thing to everybody in Rana Plaza, irrespective of whether they were in the Primark factory, which was one of a number of factories in that building. And then after that, we again going back to people had fled. So the factory owner had fled, the building owner had fled, the factory owners had fled. It became apparent that wages were also important. So we agreed that we would pay short-term compensation for 3 months' wages for 3 months' salary for everybody in the building. Whilst we then developed our own long-term compensation scheme, this is sort of in the early May, when the building had collapsed in late April. That took longer. The compensation scheme took longer because we were determined to have a compensation scheme that was based on the injuries suffered. So each individual had to be assessed for their injuries suffered. We were also determined that the person who was entitled to the compensation would keep that compensation. It would be for them and not the family, because they were the people entitled to it. So that took longer to develop than we thought it would. So we eventually paid 9 months compensation in terms of short-term compensation to everybody within that building. And our total compensation, when we then went to the long-term compensation and started to pay that out, our total compensation was $14 million.
Okay, and how many workers were directly lost in the Primark factory? It was about 1,400 overall.
Yes, it was about 250, I think. I'd have to check the actual number.
Okay, so that's a lot less than you would have paid had a similar disaster happened in this country, for example.
Well, we based it on an insurance scheme that would have happened in this country. We looked at what would happen in Europe in relation to compensation. Were the wages taken into account, and life expectancy, and the actuarial model was based on a European system with the inputs provided based on local data, and that's how we got to the numbers we paid. And that we then also agreed with the ILO, who were doing the parallel scheme, which I think is the one you were referring to. And so the ILO was also basing it on those sorts of on those numbers. So the actuarial model was based on a European standard, with the inputs based on the local numbers.
Mr. Beck, did you have any sourcing from Rana Plaza?
No.
You didn't. And did you make any contribution to the ILO fund?
No.
Didn't. And what about you, Mr. Barry?
We weren't there and we didn't make a contribution.
Okay. Thank you very much. Joan?
Leanne Wood, if I could ask you, well, to say we are pleased that Burberry has announced an end to the wasteful practice of burning unsold stock. I suppose a concern would be that you could hardly have been said to have done this voluntarily as a progressive move or because of a concern about the ecological emergency that we face. In fact, your initial response was described as brazen. So, although now it's a good move, it appears to be done to avoid further reputational damage rather than any other concern. However, I wondered how widespread you think this practice is across the rest of the luxury fashion industry.
So yes, we have committed to stopping it in our environment. It's something that we actually started in 2017 with establishing some goals for ourselves around how we revalue waste. It is an industry practice. We're the only luxury business that has reported it in its accounts, so we don't have specific numbers for other companies, but it is something that does happen in the industry.
Could I ask Mike Barry and Paul Lister then? M&S and Primark have both piloted take-back schemes. What's been your experience of how successful they are?
So just to step in, and again, two observations. What is your internal clothing? So each year you're producing samples, you're getting garments back that you can't sort of resell, customer returns. What we do is we give about 500,000 garments a year to charity. The rest is sent for commercial repurposing, nothing to landfill or incineration. And then with our customers, we worked with Oxfam for 10 years on something called swapping. We've taken back about 30 million garments over 10 years. They've sold those products, raised about £21 million for overseas development work. We don't think the great challenge is about take-back. Take-back is possible. It's what you do with 1.2 million tonnes of fibre that the British industry uses collectively each year. And we need to work harder, all of us, in terms of developing new industries that can use those fibres. So it's quite possible to prevent anything going from to landfill or to incineration. It's much harder at the moment to actually do something with the fibres you recover. But we make sure that certainly with Oxfam, anything that don't sell in the UK is sold ethically overseas. Anything that can't be done there, recycled.
And they're interesting points because clothing production has roughly doubled in the last 15 years, and yet across the whole industry only 13% of total material input is in some way recycled. So it doesn't seem a hugely effective way forward at the moment. Would you agree?
I would agree. I think that's why we're all sat here. That at the moment, that 1.2 million tonnes of fibre that costs probably several £billion around the world to buy, put into garments to be sold to consumers, is not recovered as well as it could. We could have a really important industry in the UK, circular economy industry, that uses hundreds of thousands of tonnes of cotton, of wool, of leather, of any material that we bring back. So there's lots of potential there. M&S has done a good start. I would say all of us can do so much more.
Solicitor?
So we piloted a take-back scheme in 2016. What we wanted to do there was learn how the clothing went through the logistics of a take-back scheme, and we will next year in 2019 put a take-back scheme in all of our stores. One thing we learned was we need to put the boxes in store in a recognised place at the front of house as opposed to in a sort of service area behind the cash tills. And we will the take-back scheme is being developed. We've talking to a number of recyclers, and then the money that is used benefited from the take-back scheme will be donated to charity, local charities, depending on which country in which we operate. In relation to unused stock, we have very, very little unused stock. It's about 0.25%. That's been donated to New Life, which is the charity. They benefited, they say, to the tune of about £4 million from that. And in the last year, that's benefited something like 25,000 children that they've been looking after.
I mean, it's good to hear of these initiatives and to give you the opportunity to talk about them here. But it does seem that it's making very little impact overall at the moment. And I wonder whether there is a real commitment within your companies and within the industry to make these changes for the right reasons to deal with the ecological emergency we face, and also with the waste that you create that helps to support the profit of your business. Or is it really just to avoid the situation Burberry got themselves into?
Well, again, I'm very, very clear here. We take it seriously. That's what we've been working on for 10 years. We've done 30 million garments. Could it be more? Possibly. You know, we've got to push ourselves harder to get more. I think what we're running into is the constraints of the current system. If there are better outlets to take the fibre back that we recover, you know, the many thousands of tonnes of wool, for example, that we use in suits, to use that productively to upcycle, to put into another industry, then you can really start to drive some scale. We also need consistency across the high street. Again, you've heard some good story there from Primark. We do good stuff. I think what we need is consistent recovery of garments. And underpinning it all, and I think we'll come back to this later, is the need for us all to sell quality goods that last a long time. So that's the ultimate way to stop waste, is to sell quality. But once you do, get it back and make sure you use that material again, time and time again.
Well, of course, we know that, you know, you, as an industry, you've not yet been required by legislation to take responsibility for discarded garments, so quite different there to, say, the electronic goods. I just wonder then, you'll know, and this is to everybody, so if you'd like to come in on this, the government's currently working on a new resources and waste strategy. So what policies would you like to see ministers include to reduce and reutilise this mounting of clothing waste that we are currently producing, or that you are currently enabling to be produced?
So one of the things that we would be very keen to see is anything that can really stimulate investment in innovation in some of these areas that Mike was mentioning, or in recycling technology. There are certain fabrics, whether it's fibres or even finished fabric, that today it's very difficult to find recycling solutions for, and the UK really could lead the way in this area. So ways to stimulate innovation, new ideas. We participate with the Royal College of Art in a partnership to look at developing new kinds of fabric, and I think there is a huge opportunity for us in this area.
I mean, we're looking at new fabrics. We look at new fabrics and the new technologies that we've been talking about. You know, it's difficult at the moment to disentangle, if you like, cotton and polyester. So you have a polyester cotton shirt. It's difficult to disaggregate those two materials. But new technology may be able to do that. And we're speaking to people in relation to new technology that will be able to do that and produce virgin cotton, virgin polyester, which would then be used, could be then recycled again. That would be very helpful if there's incentives in relation to that. That could be done in the UK, where, if you like, the clothes end up.
Do you think we can do this in the timescale that we now know we have in order to reverse the damage
yes,
that we've done to the environment?
I do, because I think a committee, I know, looking through, the committee has heard from people who are looking at it now and are testing that technology. And if that technology works, then there is no reason why it can't be done in a very short period of time. And it needs to be done here. Would be better to be done here than in the developing world again, because this is where the clothes stay.
Just three quick observations to add to the answers there. Again, in terms of extended producer responsibility, I think, again, the policy system needs to consider that 1.2 million tonnes of fibre. Is it a valuable resource compared to the other resources that government could intervene on? Quite possibly, yes. So I think EPR could well be considered. Zero Waste Scotland have done some really good innovative stuff to start to create micro-enterprises that can take material back and reuse it. I think that's very, very important. The third thing I don't want us to forget is new business models emerging. So it's very early days yet, but you can start to see rental models, sharing models starting to emerge that will just get people to participate in the use of clothing in a different way. It's small, it's early, but again, it will start to disrupt the marketplace. Is it quick enough? That's probably the homework question here. Probably not. And I think, again, we need to think quite rapidly how over the next 5 years we can move to a position where a significant amount of that 1.2 million tonnes is either voluntarily or legally driven, reused in the UK economy.
Mr. Beck, do you wish to add anything?
No, mirror of the comments been given. I think the focus is on the fibre to fibre model. has to start at fibre and then be able to go back to the fibre, and it's the research needed for that and the facilities, as Paul said, here in the UK.
And what's Arcadia's commitment in relation to these issues?
Again, we're at the moment just staying abreast of what innovations are out there, but I think at the moment it's fairly limited in what can be go all the way back from fibre to fibre. But we'd be happy to look to purchase it.
Thank you, Chair.
So essentially, you're not doing anything,
Not fibre to fibre, no.
right? And no end-of-life collections.
Oh, sorry, yes, we do have a take-back scheme in our head office, and we've trialled it also in our main store and looking to see. You're talking about take-back schemes?
Office? In your head office?
Yes, for all the samples, materials that might come in.
Okay,
So for
but
our
not,
employees.
and in one store?
And in, yes.
How many stores have you got in the UK?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Okay, maybe you could write to us with that information. And what about the fabric that is lost in the cutting in these countries where you manufacture? What happens to that?
From my experience in visiting factories, the fabric that's actually wasted is an extremely small amount. So when you look at the technology that goes in, because of the cost of the fabric is of the overall cost price is the majority, the actual investment in technology to make sure that there is as little waste as possible through different design and cutting techniques is huge. So the actual waste from that is very, very minimal. And from in the factories there that I know about that I've seen, it does be recycled.
So you've been to one factory and it was recycled there?
I've been to many factories and the fabric is never wasted.
And what happens to it?
It would be sold on normally by the factory.
For what?
For normally to go to recycling to make things like insulation or
Okay.
to other industries.
So you've got, we've done a Google and it's amazing what you can do. 2,500 outlets in this country and one take-back scheme for the public.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Robert?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Marks and Spencer's, Arcadia and Primark have all signed up to the Sustainable Clothing Action Plan, and this relates not just to setting targets for waste, which we've talked about, but also carbon emissions and water use. Could I ask what challenges you've faced in addressing these targets, and is this something that you sort of lie awake worrying about meeting these targets, or is it just another box on the corporate social responsibility plan that you can tick and tell your shareholders and customers that you're doing the right thing?
If I may respond, I mean, we're huge supporters of SCAP and the work that Waste Resources Action Plan does generally across the UK on plastics and other materials. So SCAP is very, very important, and there's two insights there. One is existing work. Some of the challenges are particularly around measurement, making sure that as an industry consistently measure environmental impact. And again, you may well have heard of the HIG Index. Again, it's a global scheme now to make sure we all consistently define environmental impact in the same consistent way. So I think making sure that the UK industry adopts HIG voluntarily across everything it does will help SCAP enormously. The other thing that SCAP can do is address new issues. And again, I think you've heard evidence already about microfibre shedding from clothing and the impact on the oceans, the risk that's growing there. And again, I think SCAP has got a really important role to do in convening the whole industry to come up with solutions. We're working with something called the European Outdoor Group on that. But I think the SCAP platform in the UK can be very, very powerful for solving it.
Mr. Beck?
Yeah, I agree. Everything Mike says. I think the components of SCAP is the correct recipe for dealing with some of the things that have been spoken about here today in terms of the consumer advertising campaigns that they've done and the focus in reducing the carbon, water and waste. So we actively support it.
Mr. Lister,
as we do, being part of this. I think where Mike was earlier, any collaboration, you learn from each other, and that's helpful. And SCAP is one of those things that we've learned from, and we've made big progress in relation to the target set.
And when you're looking at the type of fabric you might use in a garment, do you bear in mind, because obviously you've got a lot of man-made fibre out there, you've got mixes, and you've also got natural fibres, which I suppose if you're looking at sort of energy field, you'd be looking at the sustainable energy versus fossil fuel. It's basically a fossil cloth. Do you look at that as you starting the process of sourcing a new garment, or is that something that sort of it's the end of the exhaust pipe sort of problem that you try and sort rather than at the start?
In terms of you're saying in terms of when the garment's being designed, what goes into the garment at that stage?
Yes. Well, if we use cotton as opposed to a polyester or what have you, does that mean that at the end of the life of that garment, or as we produce waste during the production, that's going to be much more sustainable and meet the targets that have been set, or is this a sort of problem we have to deal with at the end?
No, I think. I mean, when the buyers are looking at look at a garment in an overall view and a manufacturing process in an overall view, and part of that will be, where they source, how they source, what goes into the garment, and then the end result of the garment, the whole environmental footprint of that. That's all set out in a document that they will produce and look at in order to determine what that garment looks like in its overall context. There are fashion elements as well that go into that. They're not blind to that. Clearly.
And as a rule, sort of at the bottom end of the market, it's more man-made. At the top end, it's more natural fibre, or is that not?
No. I think nearly 50% of our garments are made out of cotton.
Right.
Cotton is by far and away our largest fabric.
And would you like to come in again?
Just very, very briefly, I think this is a really good discussion because every fibre that we use carries an impact. So polyester, man-made, might be worse in terms of carbon footprint. We know that cotton's had enormous challenges in terms of fertiliser use, pesticide use, labour stands in fields. Many of us are on the pathway now to 100% BCI cotton, better, more sustainable cotton. So every time you make a decision to hop from, let's get out of that fibre because it's a problem, into another one, you run the risk of jumping from frying pan to fire. And that's why the Higg Index is so very important, to allow us to compare fibres to work out how we take the optimum decision about managing that environmental impact. So more for us all to do. But I think what I would say is every raw material we use is on a pathway to be very much more sustainable than it was. We haven't quite worked out how to work out whether one fibre is 17.8% better or worse than the other one at this moment in time. That will come.
And maybe to the whole panel, do you think that a voluntary approach is going to be sufficiently robust to deliver the reduction, particularly in carbon, but also water use, as we mentioned, or should we move to a more compulsion in this, as we've seen in other industries which are maybe more energy intensive, but every bit counts towards our overall CO2 reduction targets? Maybe, as we haven't had Burberry along.
I mean, we are committed to 100% renewable energy. At the moment it's about 50%, but we're making good progress towards that target. I certainly think that individual companies on their own may struggle to do this, particularly smaller companies. So anything that we can do to support, whether it's in industry collaboration or by learning from each other, is very helpful. I think beyond that, there's going to be companies with different challenges, and it's going to be hard to pinpoint one rule for everybody, I think.
Yeah. And there's companies that source globally. How much control do you have over the way that a factory's heated, or the air conditioning or lack of it that's in a particular factory in India or Bangladesh? Maybe Mr. Beck could...
I would say limited in some of our smaller suppliers. I think where we have greater purchasing power and we have strategic suppliers, which is the majority, I would say, of our intake of garments into the business, then yes, we will have some sway about where they source their energy from. And in a lot of the countries, they're encouraged to do that anyway, I think generally. It just is a good business operating model.
So would onshoring more production be a way of achieving these goals, possibly?
Potentially.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just challenge you on this? I mean, you've agreed under SCAP voluntary targets, so no hassle if you miss them, to reduce your waste by 7.5% by 2020. And so far, the signatories have reduced waste by 0.8%. That's the figures that we've got. Are they wrong? You're looking puzzled, Mr. Barry.
Yeah, there's a new report coming out in January. Again, it's not in the public domain yet. It's not for me to sort of say what the numbers say. But I think our experience is that we're making much more progress as an individual business than that. I do want to face into this voluntary point because I think you used the word environmental crisis a moment ago. I work in a food business and a clothing business. I'm used to these challenges in food. clothing faces the same challenges as food started to face 10 years ago. So I want to be very, very clear with you. Environment and social, we need to be much better. Voluntary, I think I would look at us having one opportunity to do something like Plastics Pact. So at last on plastics, the industry in its entirety, brands and retailers have faced into the need for enormous change on plastics. RAP is voluntarily leading that, supporting everybody on Plastics Pact. I think we're in at the stage where as an industry we might need something of that enormity in terms of the fibres, the factories, the take-back that we've got. If we don't produce, I would understand if you guys turned around and said you need a law to take you forward. We wouldn't be averse to that. But I do think generally the marketplace, if it takes things seriously, and that's an if, can solve this in a voluntary way. All the initiatives that we need are out there. They just need ownership and commitment to them.
Okay, well, the figures that I have from RAP from July 2017, and they show that you've reduced your carbon, the industry or the signatories have reduced their carbon footprint by 10.6% against a target of 15%. So there's no way you're going to meet a 2020 target of getting to 15% in that time. Or are you saying that I mean, what are your figures now? Are you able to share them with us?
I would think it's inappropriate with the figures coming out in January to put anything into the public domain now. I would say that the industry's made a good start towards that figure. I'm being, again, very clear, it's not enough in terms of the carbon footprint, environmental, social footprint of clothing, the billions of garments sold in the UK every year. We collectively need to be better.
And the waste is only at 0.8% per tonne of clothing, as opposed to 7. You're 10 times away from the 7.5%.
That's a very legitimate challenge on waste.
And of course, the impact of increased volumes of clothing, which you're all in the business of selling us more, outweigh these efficiency improvements, don't they? So even if you become more efficient at dealing with your waste, you're still selling more and creating more waste, because that's the model that you operate under, isn't it?
I think it's the investment up front in the design stage. So with the support of SCAP, we've just developed an internal sort of training document, a fibre toolkit, which is designed and trained out to the designers and buyers to start this at the very beginning, so at the design stage, to see what sustainable alternative fabrics there are, and on the accessories as well. So as you say, it's from the outset doing it. So if it is selling more garments, then it would have less impact, so it would offset that.
And how are you doing? You're one of the signatories.
Yes.
How are you doing with your waste reduction and water reduction and carbon reduction?
We're making good progress.
Are you going to hit the 2020 target?
That is the aim.
Mr. Lister, are you a signatory?
We are.
And are you going to hit the 2020 target?
I think in the three categories, SCAP will hit its target and will be part of that. I think with waste you've identified is the more challenging one. I think with all of these, with all the processes, you've got to start somewhere, and I think that's you have to start somewhere, have to make progress. Then we can share the progress that we make in SCAP and share that across the industry, as opposed to the difficulty is with all of it, you have to turn over the pebble. You have to start once you've started. Share what's difficult. Share what's been easier. Share what's difficult.
I mean, I represent Ossett and Wakefield, which have got a shoddy and mungo industry, which goes back sort of 100 years from the heavy woolen area, from the wool producing area of this country, where all the waste that was produced from the mills went into mattresses, refibred into carpets, bedding, insulation. It's not like there's anything new that we can invent, is there? It's just that these traditional industries have died, and it's just been easy to chuck things into landfill and forget about them. Isn't that the real problem with the fast fashion industry? If you're selling stuff at £5, people aren't going to treat it with any respect at the end of its life. It's just going to go in the bin.
I don't think that's. I think when we're not every item that we make, every item that we produce and sell, we're looking at durability. It's not a question and that the durability has a number of tests across that life cycle. It's about washing, it's about the design, it's about the treatment of that garment, and we're proud of the quality and the durability of our garment. They're not bought to throw away.
What about you, Mr. Beck? Every week is a season in Topshop, isn't it?
I'm not aware that every week's a season, but yes, we do have a lot of different ranges that come out in terms of newness. I'd agree with Paul, so we don't sell a lot of garments for £5, they're at a higher price point. And again, the product is designed and tested rigorously for things like washing, like colour fast sister light, to make sure it doesn't fade. So these garments aren't designed to be a disposable item that would be bought for a holiday. They're designed to be long lasting, and that continues on to secondary use as well of other people, whether that be a charity shop or whether that be given to friends and family. It's designed to a high standard.
Why so much of your product ending up in the bin then?
We don't believe it is ended up in the bin. We believe it does go to charity shops. We believe it does get reused and sold.
I mean, where's the evidence?
And sold on. I haven't
You're not collecting it, so how do you know what's happening? You're just believing.
Well, if you look, for example, at the second-hand market, even on eBay, and you look at the amount of items being sold there, that gives a very good indication of that our products are being resold on by our customers.
Is that not rather an indication of the fact that in the UK there has been this huge increase in the consumption of new clothing? New clothing is now higher in the UK than in any other European country, and double that of many other countries.
Exactly. I mean, we've got the highest. The model here is predicated on selling twice as many clothes as, for example, Italy buys per head. So there will be a lot of stuff for sale on eBay because we buy more stuff, I believe. Okay, we'll move on. Caroline.
Thank you. I wanted to come to cotton production in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan in particular. You'll know they are both in the top 10 cotton producers in the world, and we've had some really worrying evidence about the governments of those two countries in particular forcing their citizens to pick cotton under incredibly harsh conditions every harvest season. So I wanted to ask each of you in turn, if that's all right, about whether or not any of the cotton you use is sourced from either of those two countries. Maybe Mike.
And to answer first, no, it's not. We've banned very clearly in our supply chain the use of cotton from those two countries. Every piece of cotton we use, and we use over 50,000 tonnes, is on very close to being 100% Better Cotton Initiative cotton now, so more sustainable cotton. We've seen demonstrable evidence working with people like WWF, working with 20,000 farmers in India about the difference that makes. Will we stop there? No, we'll keep pushing for higher standards. But we banned the worst, and we're moving all of it to at least a good standard, and from there we'll move on.
We don't source a cotton from either of those countries. We're also members of the Better Cotton Initiative and are targeting 100% of our cotton coming from that initiative.
By when?
By 2022. It's about over 20% now, and we're working on improving it.
And again, we do not source cotton from those countries, and that's a condition of trading with our suppliers for both countries you mentioned.
And are you part of the Better Cotton industry?
We are, yes.
And what percentage have you got to in terms of your...
We've got a 20% target by 2020.
A 20% target by 2020?
Correct.
And what are you at now? Do you...
We're well on the way to hitting that target.
What does that mean?
I haven't got the figures in front of me, but I know that we're...
Maybe in the letter you're writing to us about some other bits and pieces you could add
yes,
that.
certainly.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Lister.
So we've also banned cotton coming from Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. We're not a part of the Better Cotton Initiative. We have started about 5 or 6 years ago. We started a sustainable cotton initiative with Cotton Connect in Gujarat in northern India, where we signed up with the Self-Employed Women's Association to see whether we could get cotton from those fields into our supply chain. That was the aspiration. We started with 1,200 farmers. We've recently expanded that to 10,000 farmers in Gujarat, and we've expanded it again now into Pakistan, where we've gone to 20,000 farmers again with Cotton Connect, and we would expect so next year we've got the cotton. We've had sustainable cotton pyjamas using that cotton. It's come all the way through the supply chain, and next year we would expect about 20% of our production to be in. From that sustainable cotton.
How does that scheme differ from the Better Cotton Initiative? How do the two relate? Because one of the difficulties, I think, for consumers is just that there are so many different projects out there that how do we know which one is best in terms of its sustainability, for example?
That's a very good question in terms of what is sustainable, what is more sustainable. So,
is there a reason
100%.
The other one?
Well, yes, because when we looked at it, we set off with the aspiration that 100% of the cotton in each of the garments that we would classify as sustainable was sustainable. So there wasn't a mass balance element to it. It was 100% from those fields in Gujarat, and that was the aim, to see whether we could do it. Having succeeded in doing it, we then decided to expand it, and we see that as our way forward. That we will have in each garment that we have a sustainable label on. 100% of the cotton in that garment will come from the Sustainable Cotton Initiative that we're doing with Cotton Connect.
And who audits it? This is your own scheme, in a sense.
Well, it's a Cotton Connect scheme, so we're not cotton experts.
Okay.
So that's why we have the partners. Cotton Connect introduced us to the Self-Employed Women's Association. So to be fair, it's women farmers in Gujarat, and they were introduced to us by Cotton Connect, who had the connections anyway. And Cotton Connect are our sort of cotton advisors.
So do they audit?
Yes, they audit. They check it, and then it goes through various schemes in order to make that happen.
And do you have a definition of sustainable that you can share with us? Because it's a word that gets used and abused in a few ways.
Well, it is quite it is quite a tough. So from our perspective, the results we've seen. I forget the name. And I apologise. I forget the name of the organisation that verifies it in terms of the verification. But the sustainability elements come from us, in that it's there's a reduction in fungicides, in pesticides. There's
but a reduction. Sorry.
50% of reduction in each of those, and then there's a switch from chemical fungicides and pesticides into more earthy, organic. Thank you. But they're not. No, it's not really organic. It comes from cows and the like. And it's organic, it'll do, yes. And so that's the reduction there. Yields have gone up, and then also irrigation.
Yields have gone up?
Yields have gone up, which is...
Even though your pesticide use has gone down?
Yeah, yields have gone up by I think it's 6%.
To what do you attribute that?
So we think it's to do with the use of these organic pesticides and fungicides. We think it's also to do with irrigation. So I visited the fields recently, actually. You know, the seed initially was scattered all over the place. Now it's in lines. It seems basic to us. It wasn't basic to these women farmers. And now it's in lines. So irrigation is properly done.
Are you using more water or less water?
Less water. They would just flood. They didn't really know. I mean, to be fair, they've been doing it a long time. They didn't have the education. Having had the education, they then have learnt to do it properly. And frankly, their income has also gone up. So their income has gone up by something like 240%.
And these targets, for example, the 50% reduction or whatever in pesticide use, in chemical pesticide use, is that something that's going to be further ratcheted down over time, or is that once you've hit that, then that's your standard, if you like?
No. To be fair, again, I go back to when we started, we didn't really know. So you have to start somewhere. You have to kick off and see where you get to. I think we will always look to reduce, or that the farmers will always look to reduce. These are expensive chemicals. These were expensive.
My concern is that while it's laudable to have reduced chemical use by 50%, if you're also increasing the amount of clothing that's being produced by 150%, then obviously the net difference is not the same. I mean, you're still, the overall volume of what you're producing risks undermining the good reductions that you're making in terms of the pesticide use. So I'm just trying to understand whether or not you have a motivation to move towards organic, for example, completely organic.
And not organic. I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Not organic. We will continue to look at the Sustainable Cotton initiative that we've driven, and then yes, I accept that actually so that's why we're looking at the take back schemes. Cotton is easily recyclable if it's in a purer form. If it's starting to be mixed with polyester, it becomes more difficult. And that's why I was talking before about new technologies that are perhaps available and will be available that we're looking at now. So I think a combination of in the field all the way through to what happens at end of life is the more holistic approach that we're looking at.
Can I go to Mr. Beck and ask what proportion of the cotton that's in your shops is organic?
I haven't got the figure off the top of my head. It's not a large proportion that would be a wholly organic. There will have elements in there, and again with our better cotton mix that we have as well.
So can you just say a couple of words about the Better Cotton?
Yes, certainly. So the Better Cotton Initiative is all about training farmers, probably in similar to what Cotton Connect is, but they will train the farmers to use the land sustainably, so they don't use harsh pesticides that will give the farmers initial quick yields. It will be very much about looking after and maintaining the soil, so it will produce yield over a longer time and with less harmful pesticides.
And what percentage of your cotton is under the Better Cotton Initiative?
So we've got a target of 20%, and we're by 2020.
And that's you're going to tell us?
Yes, that's the one I can come back and confirm.
It'd be interesting to have that figure to know how far you are towards that, because 2020 is quite close.
Yes, yeah, I know we're making good progress.
Thank you. Leanne. Could you let us know what percentage in your cotton is organic?
We use primarily natural materials, obviously a slightly different business model. Yeah. I will come back to you on the particular percentage around organic, but over 20% of our cotton is sourced through the Better Cotton Initiative.
And is there do you know if there's an aspiration to increase that 20%?
Our goal is 100% by 2022.
Anyone?
Yeah, so we're 75% of the way there in terms of BCI cotton. We'll be 100% next year, 2019. I think a very important point raised across the table has been this extension support. It's not just sending a standard down a supply chain from London to say hope for the best. It's about working with farmers to make a real difference out there. And I said at the start of the discussion about cotton, we can't rest here, because I think what you're getting is the industry to a good common standard. We're working with Textiles Exchange. We brought 30 brands around the world together to commit to 100% BCI cotton. Good start. Get everybody to that silver standard, and then you've got to push on to gold from there.
And just very quickly, what work are your companies engaged in to reduce the amount of synthetic shed that happens, from products when they're being washed and so on? I know we've touched on this a few times, but in terms of the actual companies, maybe I'll go back to Paul Liston work at Percolon.
So we joined the microfiber. It's new. We had to start. We joined the microfiber initiative, which is being advised by the University of Leeds, to see quite what that looks like. I think it's early stages.
So are you putting money into that directly, or is it when you say you're joining it? Does that
we have joined. Whether I can't tell you whether we put. I can't tell you whether they joined. Whether there was a joining fee. I'll have to come back. If I could come back to you on that, I can't tell you whether there was. But the learnings from that we would then take and apply.
Same question.
Yes, so we joined the industry acting on microfibres, and I think, yes, there was a fee of around £5,000, I believe. So we're now looking at the next step of what we can do with them to support them in their goals, which I think first and foremost is about collating what evidence and research has been obtained already, and then looking where there are gaps.
We're members of the Ellen MacArthur Make Fashion Circular Initiative, and as part of that we've joined a working group with them on microplastics. We've also committed to their New Plastics Economy global commitment as well. So we're really working on this with the companies that are involved in that foundation.
Okay.
Yeah, we too are part of the European Outdoor Group, Leeds University collaboration on this, paying the £5,000. I would say it's the least understood of all the environmental challenges the industry's got, and I think I've just seen some research that suggests it's not just synthetic fibres, that natural fibres like cotton that are heavily coated in chemicals get into the environment might not break down as well. So it's just indicative of how much more research is needed in the space. But
I must admit, when we started off on this inquiry, I was shocked at how little research was being done in this area. And so, as well as giving some support to what's happening at the University of Leeds, and I know, Leanne, you've explained what you're doing with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but are any of you doing anything else on this separately from what's happening at the University of Leeds in terms of research?
Again, all our efforts are going in there because I think we need one truth. I think there's a real risk you end up with 4 or 5 different competing research arms coming up with different ways of defining what's been shed and the impact it's got. So I think it's very important that the Leeds Initiative, European Outdoor Group, brings together all the businesses to commit. Will there be more research in the future? Absolutely. This is just the beginning on this one.
And what incentives could the government be putting in place, do you think, to encourage greater use of recycled fibres? Is there anything you think that a legal framework could help? I mean, would it help to have a percentage of recycled fibres going into...
I mean, we've set a voluntary target of 25% of our clothing having 25% recycled content by 2025. So that's a target that we've set. Could government work on something around extended producer responsibility, EPR, to encourage that? Yes, they could.
What percentage are you at now? Towards that 25%?
Very tiny. We've done a few ranges. We've done a men's suit with David Gandy where we've got 50% of the wool recovered from our swapping scheme. We've taken suits back, reused it, made thing. But it's more to raise awareness of the issue rather than to claim that it's hundreds of thousands of garments. It's not. So I think the only way is up from here, but we've set a very clear marker for our business and our business units. We need to move forward on this one.
So we've invested £3 million with the RCA in a future materials research group that's not only looking at this issue, but certainly is trying to look at what future more sustainable materials could be. To your question about government intervention, I think targets are one thing. The other area that I really think could do with some help is innovation and stimulating innovation. I completely take the point about old industries being able to do this, and in fact many of our raw materials will go into some of the kind of areas that you talked about, but I still think there must be some new solutions and innovation that we could help stimulate.
Okay. Anything else? Don't really have to add if there's nothing more to add. But
no, I agree with the comments.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just go back up to the Turkmenistan question? Because one of the things in the evidence was that actually it's not branded as Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan cotton. It's branded. It comes through Turkey. So how are you making sure that are you buying cotton from Turkey? And if so, how are you making sure that it's not Turkmenistan cotton?
Again, working very closely with suppliers. We've got a very clear policy position. We work very closely with our supply chain, long-term partners. You work back down the supply chain. Can any business say there is 0 kilogram of Turkmenistan cotton in the business, having banned it? No, they can't. But what you can do is rigorously enforce that back down the supply chain, raising awareness amongst your suppliers, working back down their supply chains. But again, getting 100% traceability on the cotton we sell in the way that we have in factories is the next big horizon. And I think that will be one of the defining challenges for the industry over the next 5 to 10 years. Those that manage it will succeed. Those that don't will probably struggle in the longer term in the marketplace.
Ms. Wood?
So we expect all of our suppliers to sign up to our ethical trading code of conduct and our responsible business principles. Traceability is something that's hugely important to us across all of the raw materials that we use. I would agree with the point that an absolute 100% certainty is very difficult for us to achieve, but it's certainly something that we really focus on.
So they sign up to your standards, and then how do you audit those standards?
So we carry out more than 400 audits a year. Some are scheduled, some are unscheduled across the supply chain. We have an external advisory body that helps us set the standards for those audits, and we go back if there are findings. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, depending on what the findings are. So we carry out those audits very regularly.
Mr. Beck?
So again, we communicate it very clearly to all our suppliers that sourcing cotton from those countries are banned, and then on each individual factory set up they actually have to sign and agree to a disclaimer to say that. And then we will do random checks throughout the year, particularly with Turkish suppliers, and then to receive on our online system to make sure that there's a paper trail for where they bought that cotton, and that's not for 100% because it is difficult with smaller suppliers suppliers with smaller orders, as the colleagues here have just said, because of the...
But you can track it through your data systems, can you?
For some, yes.
But not all?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, Mr. Lister.
So similarly, we banned it, and then we banned it through the supply chain. Each of the suppliers was banned from buying it. We've got an audit team like Burberry, and part of that audit process is to check. We do a number of what we do, nearly 3,500 audits. We've got a team in Turkey that are well aware of all the issues. Each team in each country, frankly, is aware of the issues in those particular countries, and they are aware and look out for any breaches of our terms of trade, and this is one of our terms of trade.
Okay, thank you. Philip?
I'd like to conclude this session by asking you a little bit about the implications of some of the potential policy solutions. We've touched on some of this earlier. As a committee, we've taken a bit of a lead recently in exposing modern slavery on our high streets. I'm not suggesting any of you are involved in that in this country, but it's a subject of considerable concern to us, and we've touched on working conditions within your supply chains. We heard from Dr. Sumner of Leeds University, who used to work for M&S, that having something in legislation to require companies to expose where their raw materials have been sourced would lead to a sea change in attitude. Can I ask each of you whether you would welcome some legislative effect on this issue, and whether it would put you at a competitive disadvantage?
Just a quick intervention. I think transparency is absolutely key. I think the bandwidth of government to be able to legislate on everything is limited. If there's one thing that government's done particularly well in this space in the last 2 years has been Modern Day Slavery Act, forcing people to step forward and say whether they're doing something or not, and saying what that is. Again, there's still more that can be done in terms of making sure that it's easy to find everybody's modern day slavery statement, so they can be compared and contrasted. So FTSE 100 M&S ranked top at the moment, but not complacent. If we did that for fibre, I think there's a lot to be said that government should be asking us to declare where it comes from and then stepping back and let the marketplace, NGOs, the media actually mine that information to hold us to account. I think I saw a great initiative yesterday from TISC report that have taken the modern day slavery statement information and linked it to every postcode and city in the UK. So you can work out where modern day slavery might be most prevalent in any one part of the UK. So I think giving people access to those databases drives change without you having to micromanage every aspect of the marketplace. So we'd certainly support more transparency in the marketplace.
So we very much are focused on how we can make sure that all the conditions in our supply chain are right for all people that work there. The majority of our production is in the UK and Europe, and we don't manufacture in countries where we can't be confident that we're able to put in place our principles. I think to your question about other companies, we're the only UK luxury manufacturer of this kind of scale. Our competitors are outside the UK, so I think it would very much depend on what kind of legislation and where that took place.
But if it was to require you to identify the sources of your raw material, not where you do your manufacture, would that put you at a disadvantage, or would you welcome that?
It would be different from our competitors. And that's something that we are continually thinking about, transparency, but it certainly would be different from our competitors who wouldn't have to do that.
Again, I couldn't see it as a disadvantage. I would think the practicalities of it would be difficult. Again, I think with larger suppliers that import lots of goods versus smaller suppliers where tracing that, let's say cotton back would be challenging. But yes, I think we'd welcome it.
I think the initial step for me would be the transparency in the modern slavery statements themselves that exist at the moment. I think that's the statement, the Modern Slavery Act did a really good job, but actually being able to compare what's going on within each of the businesses that are putting out a modern slavery statement is quite hard at the moment. So transparency in relation to that, I think, would shed light on quite what the next steps should be, and whether that is something around the key components, or whether that's simply around what's going on at the level still of the modern slavery statement, whether everybody who's supposed to be doing one is doing one, and then what they each look like in that regard. That would be for me would be the key first step before we went further, because some people clearly won't be going as far as others, even at this early stage in the Modern Slavery Act.
And finally, in relation to handling the waste, the 1.2 million tonnes, I mean, here it seems that there's been very poor progress for all the reasons that you've described. Again, do you think that we should be following, for example, the French model when the government comes out with its waste resources strategy imminently? We're expecting for some additional extended producer responsibility in other sectors. Would you welcome such a thing in your sector? And again, would you see that as being putting you as physical retailers on the high street, where you have the space and the capacity to receive, take back, and we've heard it's very variable across the panel, whereas some of your competitors online don't have a physical presence? So would that again put you at a disadvantage, and how would we bring them into such a scheme? We start with Mr. Lister.
Any scheme, frankly, any scheme that levels the playing field and is transparent in that, we would have no issue with that at all. You know, we as I say, we welcome the Modern Slavery Act. Any scheme on take-back, mandatory take-back, have no issue with that. It's just that level playing field that we would ask for in any legislation, whatever it may be that for the online retailers, for the high street retailers, of any size as well. The regulatory burden is often easier for us to fulfil than the smaller competitors. But any regulation needs to be enforced and level.
Yeah, so as Paul mentioned, I think a level playing field and making sure that there's the wider facilities for consumers to recycle, so whether that be at local amenity sites and allowing free access. So I don't think that every consumer before they go shopping will remember to go and collect garments from their wardrobe that they haven't worn to take back. Whereas I think if they're doing a spring clean or a clear out, they might well then collect lots of garments to take, and that might well go to a charity shop or an amenity centre. But yes, we'd welcome a plan, as Paul said, as long as it was fair.
I think the points on level playing field are well made. I think the other thing I would add is this is a responsibility for all of us. You know, we're trying. There's more that we can do. We haven't got it all sorted yet. But I think it's also about informing consumers, about us working in partnership. There's clearly a role for government here as well.
We would have no problem supporting an initiative like that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for coming. That was the bell for prayers to begin. Can I thank all of our witnesses for appearing before us today, and we're going to do a swift turnaround to move to our online retailers. Order. Order, if I can call the committee to order. We are now moving on to our second panel in this hearing on online fashion brands and retailers and your social and environmental impacts. Can I ask you to introduce yourself, starting from my left, Mr. Smith?
Yes, hi, good morning. My name's Paul Smith. I'm Head of Product Quality and Supply at Misguided.
My name is Carol Kane. I'm Joint CEO at the Boohoo.com group.
Good morning, my name is Nick Beaton and I'm CEO of ASOS plc.
Thank you very much indeed for coming. We're disappointed not to have the CEO of Misguided with us. Again, if I can remind colleagues and audience members to turn off phones, etc., so we don't get disturbed. There was some buzzing in the previous session. We're disappointed not to hear from Misguided CEO, Nitin Passy. Mr. Smith, I mean, he said he thinks it's a bit unfair how you've been called in. People trying to create a story and you're the bait. Is that how it feels?
I would like to context the size of our business because I think that is important. I'm here with two Davids, two Goliaths of the fashion industry. We are somewhat smaller. We represent 0.26% of total women's wear sales in the UK. We only turn over 200 million. We've only been trading for 9 years. We're a small, privately owned business. And as such, we are glad to take our place at the table. Obviously, we're part of the UK fashion industry, but we are extremely small by comparison to, particularly the other retailers that you just heard of this morning.
I hear, but we were very keen to hear from the self-styled king of fast fashion, especially because of some of the very worrying evidence we heard about company practices, particularly in this country. And your point about 0.26% of the fashion market, I mean, no company has more than 7% of the fashion market. It's a very fragmented market. And in the top 10, Sports Direct only has 2.4% of the market. So it's kind of, you are one of the top online retailers, which is why we were particularly keen to hear from you. Do you feel that you're being used as bait? And what's the problem with this inquiry that means your chief exec won't come here?
There isn't a problem with the inquiry, which means that our chief exec won't come. It's about the appropriateness of person. If the aim of this inquiry is to get to the absolute issues, then it's important to have the experts in front of you and the people within our business. In your
online competitors, the experts are sitting next to you and they're the chief executives who've come in.
Okay, well, in our business, we are a small family business. We have very few directors. When it comes to policy on sourcing, on ethics, on product quality, sustainability, that's my area. That's why I'm employed, and I'm the best person qualified to answer your questions.
Well, I have to say, Mr. Smith, that we received a letter from Mr. Passy who says that, in regard to yourself, Paul has 33 years' experience working in clothing retail at a variety of retailers. Well, we will get experience from other retailers, and I'm sure that they can give us examples across the whole of the industry. But I understand that your business was started in 2008 by Mr. Passy, who was a lone operator.
That's correct.
How long have you been at the business?
Yes, I've been with the business a year now.
A year?
Yeah.
Since the beginning of this year?
Yes.
So 11 months?
Yes.
So you can tell us more about the business in 11 months than he can in a decade?
To context our business, we have been trading for 9 years. The first 3 years of that trading was actually we were buying stock, ready-made stock from wholesalers and putting it on our website. We've actually only been contract manufacturing for 6 years.
So you can tell us more about the business after 11 months than he can in a decade?
I can tell you about where it is now, yes.
Right, okay.
Okay, let's move to the substantive issues. We've heard some very shocking evidence in this inquiry that garment factories in Leicester, the so-called dark factories, are supplying, in particular, misguided and boohoo, and that they're flouting employment law by not paying the minimum wage. So can you start by telling me, do you source from Leicester?
We do.
Okay, and Miss Kane?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Where else do you source from in the UK? Which other cities?
Manchester.
Purely Leicester.
Purely Leicester.
Purely Leicester.
Okay. You, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Baton, do you source from?
We do. We have about 19 suppliers in the UK, of which around 14 are in Leicester. Less than 3% of our total sourcing comes from the UK.
Sorry, 14 out of your 19 suppliers are in Leicester?
Correct.
And where are the rest?
London, Wolverhampton, a couple in Wolverhampton.
In Wales?
Wolverhampton.
I heard Wolverhampton. What did you say afterwards?
2 in London, 2 in Wolverhampton, that's 18, and missing one, can't remember.
Okay, if you can write to us with the missing one, that would be great. London, Wolverhampton and Leicester. Okay. How are you ensuring that the minimum wage is paid in these 14 Leicester factories, Mr. Baton?
Well, about 4 years ago, the ETR report was issued in Leicester that was pretty shocking to us, and that talked about unauthorised subcontracting, non-payment minimum wage, unrecording of hours. As a result of that, we worked with a number of the retailers and we developed an auditing technique called Fast Forward, and that was aimed at making sure These issues were tracked, and these issues were addressed. All of our factories we work with are now 100% signed up to Fast Forward, and we've spread this with our industry partners, which we think is a great thing. And so I'm pretty certain that these issues don't occur in the 14 factories we work with in Leicester. I've visited probably half a dozen of those in the last 6 months, and I've been several times in the last 2 years, and I'm pretty happy with the standard of those factories.
You might be happy with the standard, but one of the factories that signed up to your Fast Forward commitments, one of the guys who ran the factory, Santoshan Sangha, said he committed to it for 3 years, lost £100,000, went out of business. He said the retailers gave him no commitment in return. They go back to Turkey, they come back in 6 months' time, expect you to find you still in business.
So I don't know that gentleman, but if you give me the details of that, I will look into that one.
It's in the FT.
Okay, thank you. I will.
And on our website.
I will get the details, thank you. One of the other things we also did is...
So his argument, if I can just say, it was made by retailers for retailers with nothing for manufacturers. How would you respond to his criticisms?
He may have made that allegation against other retailers. If he's made against ASOS, I will take that very seriously, because that's very different. I'm certainly accountable for where we place our purchase orders and the standards in place that we aim to have. So he may have made it against other retailers. If he's made against ASOS, I will follow it up, and I will put it in writing to you what my findings are. But let me just go back to what I was about to say. Not only, I've got an aspiration of tripling the sourcing within the UK, and Leicester is one of those areas where I'd like to do more of it. We actually worked with the Leicester Council just over a year ago, where we asked for greater enforcement from the local agencies to actually work together.
Why should local agencies enforce conditions in your factories? Why aren't you ensuring
So the factories aren't ours, you know that, but we do place purchase
You're buying
orders.
from them, they're your suppliers.
So, Madam Chair, I wanted to triple my my business within the UK, but I wanted also greater assistance to ensure that the standards we put in place were adhered to. That would give us greater confidence to put more sourcing in. So during the course of the last 5 years, we've pulled out of 20 odd factories in Leicester, which is regrettable to me. We would love to increase our sourcing, but some of these standards weren't adhered to. So our philosophy was, give us more help doing the things that cover your remit, and we'll be able to put, with confidence, more business your way. That was the thesis of our engagement with the local council. And I'm also pleased they've acted upon that. So the Director of Labour Market, David Metcalf, has picked this one up, and I think actually they're making good progress within the market right now.
David Metcalf is the head of Labour Enforcement at Bays. He's nothing to do with Leicester Council.
No, but he's worked on enforcement, putting together the agencies in Leicester. The Guiding Coalition for Change was put together by the council leader, Peter Salisbury, and I'm beginning to think that they're going to make some progress in Leicester.
The council leader?
Peter Salisbury.
The mayor.
The mayor, sorry.
Yeah, so, I mean, you are a multi-million-pound business, and you've asked a council that's had its budget cut by 50% over the last 8 years to do your audit for you.
No, just be really clear. I have not asked them to do any auditing at all. So our auditing, we audit every factory at least once a year, and if there's risk, we keep on going. This is us going. We will commit more resources to your economy. We want to supply more from the UK. I've gone on record as saying so. But give us some help with doing these things and these things to help doing it. It's more cumulative assurance. At the same time, we've also recommended greater union presence there. So freedom from association and collaboration from the ground up helps us. So this is multiple approaches to solve the problem. And the opportunity for us is more business with the Leicester area particularly to enhance our supply chain.
What unions are in the 14 factories that you work for?
I don't know the specifics in there, but what I can say is just over 12 months ago, we signed up to a global framework agreement with Industrial. I think we're one of the first to do so. And the simple reason for that was we know auditing isn't perfect. We know it's a statement of what you can see while you're there. We also know that our buyers can't be ever present all the time. And so, but actually by bringing a union in place with freedom of association where the workers can help police this too, it helps solve the problem of greater integrity of that within sourcing. And it becomes one of the checks that the auditors refer to. They refer to the local representatives to ensure the things they're seeing are represented on the ground. So for us, it was about greater assurance that we're sourcing in the right way, and that the factories are conducting things responsibly to our standards.
So you do have, I think, Unite and GMB potentially active in your warehouse in Barnsley, is that correct?
The warehouse in Barnsley is operated by a third party called XBO, and a couple of years ago they signed an agreement with the community union.
Oh, community, right. So that you have a recognised trade union in Barnsley.
Correct.
But as you can't tell me if you have trade unions in your factories in Leicester.
Well, we've signed a global framework agreement with industrial law, which gives the access for all workers to have it. We haven't said you must, but we signed a global framework and saying this is our recommendation.
And that's that's across the world?
That's not just UK, that's wherever the ASOS manufacturer falls.
So how many, just remind me again, how many factories did you pull out of in Leicester?
23 was the exact number.
Have you published a list of those factories?
No, but I can do.
We'd be very grateful to see that list.
So working with the Mayor, we also said there's a number of areas we've got concern. We will help you with the ones we've done to assist with your enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Ms Kane, what do you do with Boohoo? How many factories in Leicester do you use?
We currently work with 94 factories and 76 cut, make and trim units.
Sorry, say again?
CMT units, we call them, so second tier suppliers.
You work with 94 factories?
94 suppliers and 76 CMT units in Leicester. So
CMT is?
So we will place...
Second tier factories?
You could refer to it as that. So if we placed an order, it would be with one of our suppliers who would have their own production capacity. If their capacities were full, there is a second tier of audited units which can manufacture for those suppliers.
That sounds like a recipe for underpayment of wages right there.
Well, they're all audited.
By whom?
We're members of SEDEX, so we use their auditing system, but we took the initiative 3 years ago to actually open our own office in Leicester and have our own team on the ground. So we're actually also part of the audit process. So we have, as well as helping, it's a very collaborative approach towards our suppliers, and those suppliers who aren't meeting the current standards, we actually help them to get to those current standards.
That's very different from the FT's investigation into how you play off suppliers against each other, which, if I can quote back to you, Boohoo holds weekly meetings at its Manchester head office where suppliers bring samples to the product teams in a single room with 10 to 12 tables. It's like a cattle market, says one person from a supplier who did not want to be named. Say I'm the buyer, you've just given me this dress for £5. I will hold it up to the next table and say, how much for that? And he'll tell you £4. How can you manufacture dresses in Leicester at £4 a dress when the minimum wage is £7.83?
So can I answer those as two different things? The comments made on the cattle market in Manchester. We have a building that's currently going through renovation in the last 2 years. We have private meeting rooms upstairs as well. So suppliers who are not comfortable in a negotiation process next to other suppliers, we do house them in other parts of the building. And that space is currently our trading floor. I don't know of any instances, and I do not accept there's any instances where suppliers are played off against each other. I used to be very much part of that supply chain for many years before I became the founder of Boohoo.com. So I do understand the sensitivity of costing from one supplier to another. So I took that allegation on board. I've asked, does this actually happen? I've sat in this meetings and I've not witnessed that ever happening on our buying floor.
But when you're in there?
When I'm in there.
Unsurprisingly. Have you thought that the behaviour might change when you're there?
I don't recognise that it does.
You don't know because you're not there, so you can't see how they behave when you're not there.
It's impossible to be in every single buying meeting, of course. But, you know...
What systems and processes have you put in place to stop the cattle market when you're not in the room?
Well, I don't call it a cattle market. I don't believe that happens. We do have an open floor where suppliers are welcomed and looked after. Now, I came from a supply chain, so I've gone into many stores where the buyer's running late and you may wait several hours for that meeting. We have a process where a supplier can come in once or twice a week and they can see all the departments that they need to see, so it's more efficient use of their time. So if they need to see the buyer who's buying tops or dresses or skirts or whatever it happens to be, they can do that in one day without them coming back and forth from Leicester to Manchester. So this is why we've established 2 main buying days a week. However, as I mentioned earlier, the process of the building renovation, that whole space has been actually changed over into extra meeting rooms. Because we do take it on board that some suppliers aren't comfortable in that environment. And actually, I agree with that. After being a supplier for many years, I do think it's quite sensitive. But I don't believe that our buyers are playing one supplier off against another.
Dispatches sent a worker undercover into factories in 2010 and in 2017. The most recent one, they were making clothes for Boohoo and Misguided, and were they were subcontracted suppliers, and in each case being paid well under the minimum wage.
So
how can you sell a dress for £5 when the minimum wage is £7.83?
Okay. So in answer to your £5 question, we have 80 dresses across the group, which is 6,700 styles, that are £5. It's a tiny, tiny amount of our collection. We currently have across the group probably 60,000 styles for sale. So it's a very, very small percentage of what we've done. We don't make any money. It is a loss leader and it's a marketing tool to drive visits to our website. Within the online model, not every item is always profitable. I think that's important but actually what we do look at, and I'm sure my colleagues here would actually agree with me on this, it's the overall profitability on the basket. So it's very much a grocer mentality. If you think about a supermarket and what's on the end of the aisle, where you've got 2-for-1 offers, they're called loss leaders in a business, and actually it's your overall basket that becomes more profitable as a result. So we do not make profit on a £5 dress.
What would you be buying a £5 dress for then?
Somewhere between £2.50 and £3.
How can you buy a dress for £3
well,
when the minimum wage in this country is £7.83?
I think we have to go back to the type of product it actually is. The dresses, which are, and there's only 80, which are £5, are very simple. There's no zips, there's no buttons. They generally are shorter length dresses. They're made largely from a polyester elastane fabric. So it's the entry price point for us. And really, I would consider them the making, the actual manufacturing skill required to make these dresses are very, very simple. So it's not a complicated dress, which I understand if you related the times, the minutes spent to actually produce one of these dresses.
Okay, so you've got fabric, you've got heating and lighting, you've got council tax, you've got business rates, and you've got wages.
Yes.
As well as the fabric that you've just talked about, and the thread, and the tax, if any tax is indeed being paid. How can you buy a dress for £2.50 that's made in Leicester when the minimum wage is £7.83?
I think we need to really understand the costing better, to understand what the fabric content, what the fabric meterage is in that dress, and the making costs. We have open costings with our suppliers.
What's the making cost of that dress then?
I wouldn't have that.
Okay, so we need to understand
today.
it better, but you can't give us the costings.
I can't give you the costing today.
So if you don't understand your costings, then can you understand why we don't understand them?
I think what I'd like to do is I'll write to you and give you a full costing of actually how we get to that £5 dress. But
right.
As I say, the profitability does not sit in Boohoo on that. The profitability sits in suppliers. Actually, I've got lots of examples where suppliers, when they're quiet, because they want to keep their workers busy throughout their quiet periods, they will work their profit model on low margin and high margin for them. So they won't just cost a particular dress and say, we're not going to do this, it's not profitable. They'll say, we've got a small profit on this item. I did this when I was in the supply chain for many years. I will supply garments where I may only have a 10 or 15% profit. I'll supply other garments that maybe I've got a higher profit when I was in manufacturing. But overall, we're keeping the factory busy through times where they may have to lay people off because they do not have work.
Yeah, because you've taken your product purchasing off to Turkey, and then they've got to...
Well, we don't. We actually manufacture a lot in the UK.
How much in the UK?
50% of our production comes out of the UK.
Can you talk me through your in-house compliance team? How many people do you have?
We've got 3 people in Manchester and 3 in Leicester, and then we have two offices in China, where we have, between the 2 China offices, about another 10 people.
What steps are you taking to make sure that you're not using forced or bonded labour in China?
Well, every factory is audited, and exactly all the same things we're doing in the UK, and we're using third-party auditors as well.
Right, so you've got a compliance team of 3 in Leicester making unannounced visits to every supplier. Does that happen every month?
It does, yes.
Okay. Mr. Smith, same question really.
In terms of UK manufacturing, 30% of our production is made in Leicester. 50% of our production is made in China. The balance is made in Pakistan, and it's our third largest market. And then we have small amounts in Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, Vietnam.
Okay, and how many factories in Leicester do you use?
We started off this year working with 35 suppliers, which represented approximately 80 manufacturing sites. Some suppliers would have more than one. As it stands now, we've rationalised that down because it was too unwieldy. We couldn't get our arms around it. We couldn't get around them all sufficiently frequently to become comfortable and confident in what was going on there. So we now work with 12 suppliers, and that represents 20 factories.
Okay, the evidence you gave to us said 11 suppliers, so is it 11 or 12?
Well, it is 12. One is actually in the process of being phased out, but they're being phased out because of quality reasons, not because of ethical reasons.
So you've gone from 80 to 12 in a year.
Yeah.
What was wrong with the other 68?
We just had too many people doing the same thing. You can't control it, you can't police it. We've got to get round on a regular basis. A member of my team is in Leicester 2 days every week. I'm going around constantly, but 2 days every week is not enough to get round 80 manufacturing sites. So the logic says that you need to be more important with fewer people, production plan become more meaningful.
And so you've gone down to 12. Can you give us the list of the 62 or the 68 that you no longer work with?
I can supply that list, certainly.
Okay, thank you. And how do you make sure that the minimum wage is paid in those factories?
Well, like my colleagues here, we have a robust code of conduct, which is based on the ETI-based code, of which we're a member. We're also a member of the Leicester Working Group. Our code of conduct is also enhanced. We stipulate that no manufacturer should pay their workers in cash, so they have to be paid through a bank account so that we've got traceability and we can see that. There's also extra clauses in our code of conduct which covers not just workers' rights but also our own rights. 2 members of Misguided team in the past 18 months have been threatened or actual physically assaulted in Leicester.
By whom?
By factory owners.
Why are they being assaulted?
Because they didn't want us to enter their premises. These, I must add, were people that we were not currently manufacturing with, but were scoping out, and they didn't like the questions that we were asking. On one occasion, former director of Misguided was actually physically chased out of the building, and one of my employees was actually grabbed by the throat and pushed out the door.
What is it that you think they're going to hide? What are they doing in there?
Underpayment of workers as usual.
Is that why you got rid of your other 68 factories?
A concern that that could be happening in people that we can't get round for sure. So what do? You make
How
sure.
many of those
that you can
68
manage them.
factories did you get round and go in and see?
Over time, we've been in every single one, but you know, the reality of it is that you need to be there constantly. It's not enough to go once. You have to keep up a presence. You have to be there.
What steps are you doing to make sure that the workers in those factories are in a trade union or able to have freedom of association?
We take quite seriously. This year we've funded a whistleblowing helpline, which we pay for, which is a 24-hour helpline advertised. We have posters printed, and we give out handouts every week, this kind of thing. As members of our team go around, they actually pass these out. These are available in 6 languages, Eastern European languages, and also Asian languages. It must be said that we actually haven't had any calls on the whistleblowing helpline, which is confidential. However, we have received calls directly to our own staff on various issues, some of which have just been general inquiries that we've been able to help with, others which have been more serious and we've passed on to the GLA.
Serious in what way?
Been issues of intimidation and bullying, threatening behaviour.
And what action have you taken as a result?
We pass those inquiries on to the GLA, anonymously though.
On to the GLA?
Yeah.
What action have you taken with the factory owner?
Well, that's very difficult because then you're faced with the question of reprisals. So you've got to bear in mind that we are going in with a presence, and that presence is known. So we have to be very careful what we do, whilst at the same time protecting the workers. Our workers also need protecting, and when you've had a member of staff that's actually been assaulted, you need to tread cautiously.
I can see that would be extremely worrying, but it's also very worrying that the helpline you've set up doesn't take calls. It's great that your colleagues are getting these phone calls, but then you're relying again on a third body to sort out those problems. What's the feedback loop with the GLA?
We've never had any feedback from them.
Okay, thank you. Philip.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, Mr. Smith, I'm sort of put you under the cosh a bit here, but in light of the interview in the Mail on Sunday by your Chief Executive, where he was identifying that your target market were the 19 to 26-year-old young women active on social media, in particular Instagram, and that's the market you were going for because they didn't like to be seen wearing garments more than once, or at least posting photographs of themselves doing so. Do you regard that as a socially responsible thing to be targeting?
We target the 16 to 29-year-old fashion-conscious woman. Our mission is to empower those women to look and feel confident for every occasion that they find themselves in. So that could be social occasion, that could be work. We do sell clothing for work as well. We do live in the Instagram generation. It's kind of taken over from Facebook. We don't encourage the use of our clothing, and we don't promote the use of our clothing as a one-off wear. There is a longevity and a quality built into our product that we've invested in. So I don't think we're being socially irresponsible. I mean, there is, we're trying to promote a feel-good factor with people, a mental well-being. If you look good, you feel good, you feel empowered. I think we've all been in that situation ourselves. It's not just young women who go through that.
I'm not suggesting that this is a unique problem for Misguided. I think there's a responsibility which should be shared across the everybody operating the social media space. We've seen increasing mental health challenges for teenagers and young people from social pressure. I'd like to ask the other panellists perhaps to comment on why aren't you trying to promote the benefits of long, durable garments rather than throwaway?
I'll take that first. We have 18 million customers globally, of which the lion's share is in 5 million of which are in the UK. They purchase from us 3.5 times a year. Their average items is 3 times. We neither promote single use, neither do we design our garments as single use, and neither does our purchasing habits from our customers demonstrate that to me. So I'd be naive not to say I recognise what we've just said, but I don't see that in our customer behaviour. We certainly do not design our product for that. The average price of our product on our site today is around £26 for. Some people call that very cheap, but our customers would call that affordable, and that's how we aim to be. Our target audience is very similar to what you described, Misguided. We call it 20-somethings, of which 70% is sub-30 and 30% is over 30, and has been for the last 15 years of ASOS' life.
Can you cite any examples where you're actively promoting durability or long life in your garment advertising online?
No, we don't.
Can you explain?
What we have done, I mean, all of the things Nick's just said, we have a very, very similar experience. So going back to average selling prices, ours is a little bit less than ASOS, it's about £13. I believe the industry at the moment is about 10. So the online is, and if boohoo.com is the entry level of online, it's certainly still above the average selling price. Is still above the industry average as it stands today. So that's one thing. In terms of use of social media, we have about 4 million customers here in the UK. We have a huge social reach across all our brands. And we use that for many ways, promotion and how to look good, makeup hauls and all that other stuff our colleagues have just talked about. What we've been doing and we've been doing this since the start of Boohoo, is how to wears videos, and we were probably a little bit ahead of the curve for the Instagram generation on doing this, as demonstrating to customers how to wear things lots of times in lots of ways and building on your current staples within your wardrobe. So we've worked with quite a lot of influencers on this topic. I can write to you and quote you for you. I've got one called Fashion Influx, which is one which is one we're using now. And that's just taking a simple item, say a cardigan, and 10 ways how to wear it. And it's about encouraging the multiple use of anything that we are currently selling.
Do any of you promote, sorry, just you come back on that. Do any of you promote recyclability of any of your garments?
We do. We're doing quite a lot of new initiatives at the moment. There's, I don't know if you may have heard of a company called Regain, where we push the download of their app from our site. They've got 20,000 drop-off points in the UK. And we're encouraging our customers for anything unwanted clothing to take them to one of these drop-off points, and in return for that they get vouchers. Could be for clothing, could be for holidays, household, whatever it happens to be. There's quite a few companies aligned with that. We have got in work at the moment. It's not ready yet, but it'll certainly be ready for 2019, where we're looking to work with some influencers and brand ambassadors to help us. And I think this would be a really good initiative. And I think the online space has a great social reach and lots of email addresses and data to work on, where we can all come together as part of an education to our customers on sustainability and how to...
I think you've got great potential. The risk is that each of your business model, as been said earlier, is built on frequent purchasing. You say you only have 3.5 a year, but you'll be trying to drive that figure up continuously. So actually you're motivated yourselves to encourage people to dispose of clothing more quickly than...
I think it's striking a balance between commerciality. Boohoo is 2.5 times a year, roughly selling about 6 items per customer into that consumer that we currently have.
So I just want to go back to my earlier answer. You asked me whether we promote durability. We test durability throughout the entire life cycle of our production. We don't promote price either. We promote look and we promote fashion. You'll never see an ad from ASOS that talks about price. What we do is to talk to our customers about care of their garments, like washing at low temperatures and things like that. We also recognise with our scale, we have a responsibility for 20-somethings. I am actually commercially incentivised to get this right. Some years ago, we realised what's bleedingly obvious now is that unless we close the loop on sustainability and we are demonstrate responsible behaviour and actually act upon it with our customers, they will buy less from us. So we've kind of gone through that journey already. We do use the power of our social media to help guide and educate. Telling doesn't normally get the best response for a 20-something audience. Guiding, educating, informing does. And we aim to use our social media to use that channel to make people feel great about their purchases and know how to deal with it if they're for the garments, or care for the garments, and also how to recycle their garments if they so choose.
I'd like to pick up on that as well, because we at Miscardis also work with Regain. We've been working with them for 6 months. We also contribute to New Life charity, which was mentioned earlier this morning by I think Primark. In terms of return garments that we get sent to us from customers, we forward those on to New Life for repurposing. In terms of wash care, we also promote wash at 30 wherever possible, and we've just finalised a tie-up with Green Earth Dry Cleaning, which is a non-solvent based dry cleaning solution, which is available up and down the country, that we will be actively promoting. We'll have a landing page on their website, and that will also, the page is so constructed to give instruction to our customers on how they can actually wash in a more eco-friendly way, full loads, etc. And then finally, we are also looking at a take-back scheme. We do have 4 stores in the UK, 2 fully owned and 2 concession. We've just had signed off recycle points in those stores so that we will be able to take back clothing from any retailer and forward that on to New Life as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John?
Thank you, Chair. Can I would like to go back a wee bit to yourself, Carol, in response to Boohoo Standards, Codes and Policies. When the Chair sent out a letter to you, I think it's the 2nd of November, you replied about the Ethical Standards Initiative, and I wondered if you had actually signed up to that standard.
We haven't as yet.
Why not?
We are. I think I've referred back to our compliance team because this is a conversation that's taking place currently and has been doing so for quite a few months. I believe we've been struggling to see where the benefits would be to some of our suppliers. So hence we've decided to, we're not close to the idea, we're still considering it at the moment. There are a few areas where I would say within Leicester, for sure, we've probably used the most factories and we've probably used the most CMT units. All of which we've, in the last couple of years, successfully managed to get through our audit process, actually without being a member of the ETI.
But surely, to goodness, if somebody sets up a standard and your person sitting beside you is signed up to this, why would you have a problem? And if you're not part of it, you can hardly improve it. And that seems absolutely fairly logical.
Which is fair comment, which is why I'm not saying no to it. I'm just saying we haven't done it as yet. And it is on the agenda and we are considering
but again, if you're trying to address the issues of modern day slavery, bad working conditions, lower minimum wages, you'd think you would jump at the chance to be involved in something like this. And if you don't jump at that chance, that sends out the wrong message to everybody else, doesn't it?
I agree the message is not clear, but we are using all of the same standards. We're not doing anything differently from the ETI, where all our audits and all our standards are based upon their code and their conduct. So we are utilising all of that. The only difference today is one of a commercial decision. Being members, we will be required to publish our whole supply chain, which is currently our engine room.
Can I ask you, there's a follow-up question to that, but I don't know if you're actually involved at the design stage of garments. I would imagine somewhere along the line you have an input into the type of garments where you buy them from. And I was really interested in if you encourage designers in the first place that you work with to use environmentally sound fibres, design clothing with, to follow on from Philip's point, about recycling and reuse in mind. And surely if you can get that right from the very beginning, I know sometimes it goes to the luxury end of the market.
We actually are doing a little bit of that at the moment. We do recognise, you know, the circular economy of getting those fibres. So just in recent months, actually, I've been in conversations with some of our Leicester manufacturers, just looking at the availability within Leicester of recycled fibres that we can use. So I'm currently going through developing a collection with the design and buying team, looking at the extra.
Can I ask you then, are you actually involved with the designers at that stage? And you could say to them, express that point that you need to be absolutely sure of the products that you're buying and where they're being sourced from, that the designers actually know all of that process.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We have this language running through the organisation, through not just the designers but also the buyers, because a lot of our buyers are involved in product development. It doesn't just sit within the design team, also sits within the buying team. So we've currently just been looking at, and I'd love to be able to share the findings when I get through this in the early part of next year, is looking at the cost difference of what the retail price will be on a 100% recycled polyester garment compared to a regular one, and then have some initiative where we can go out to through our social reach of being able to demonstrate and give the customers that level of choice. And if we combine this with a level of education on using recycling fibres and sustainability, to see how that works, because I believe this all comes back to consumer demand. The consumer demand, I've been in the industry for 32 years, I'm showing my age, and within that time I have seen prices decline considerably, and have been part of that supply chain in that. So it does come back to demand, and obviously to use sustainable fibres within the production of our garments, there will be an increased cost in doing so. I think what we can do, certainly within the online space, is be able within our models, because we haven't got huge big stores that we have to fill up with huge volumes. We probably all have a similar model where we're able to produce quite small quantities and do some test marketing to see if that works for our customers.
Okay, I did want to mention, Chair, that last night I was at an event in the Pavilion, and New Life, the charity, which seems to be well supported now. But I think they mentioned River Island last night had been involved with them for something like 15 or 16 years, where I think they're now taking, I know what they do is they took the label off them and they allowed New Life to put the label on, therefore they didn't have to get rid of anything. Everything was getting recycled and reused, and sometimes they may ask, and I sometimes think the public humiliation of other companies, for example Burberry, who thought it was a good idea to burn their clothes, which is beyond comprehension in this day and age. I think that's probably one of the best things that you could ever do with clothes. But within the context of the ETI, there are some people who are saying that these schemes really only benefit the retailers. Why would that be? Could anybody answer that?
I didn't hear your question. Can you
the question regarding the ethical trading initiative, there are some people who say that these schemes really only benefit the retailers, and I fail to understand that. So what would your response be to that? Anybody? Paul in particular? You're involved in it.
I would strongly disagree that it only benefits the retailers. It creates a base code, moral base code of expectation that we all should aspire to live by, and to conduct our businesses by. I disagree that it would only benefit I strongly disagree with that. I don't understand.
We're a member, have been for years, and it's been helpful in our journey, so I don't recognise that comment.
Can I just pick up something that Carol was mentioning as well, John? This was helpful, I think. We've got to a place where the take, make, dispose society and the approach to manufacturing has to end. So I recognise that. And the circular economy that Carol mentioned is really interesting. It has various stages. It starts with design, and it starts with how you cut the fabric, how you cut the garment, making best use of all of those, and then thinking about something creative with those offcuts. Then it goes to sourcing sustainable materials. We've spoken about that already in an earlier panel. I'll go through what ASOS is doing all of these because our approach to all of this is not competitive advantage. This ought to be something that's open source because this is not an area where competitive advantage should work. So on circular design, we developed a course with London College of Fashion and all our designers will have gone through that within the next 12 months. That's also open to every other student going through London College of Fashion and something that we're happy to open source. Sustainable materials, ASOS, 80% of our cotton is from a BCI sustainable source. We'll have 100% shortly. Our public commitment is 2025. Internally, I want that in the next 18 months.
On the environmental footprint stuff, so we've got specific questions on that.
Sure, okay.
We're trying to just focus on ETI and workers at the moment.
Okay, well then workers comes in, responsible manufacturing, we've talked a lot about that already. Informing and guiding customers, that's the brand's responsibility too. And then recycling and reusing, let's go back into the top. This is a hole in the UK industry. I would take far more reusable fibre if I could. 5% of our garments is currently from recycled fibre. So it's all right to having the take back, but then dealing with it is quite hard. We have found 2 organisations that help us with it, but the scale of getting recycled fibre at the right quality is missing. So that would help. That's something I can't influence directly. I'm trying to influence because that will help us close that loop quicker.
Can I just come back to union recognition? Could you just quickly run by and just say whether all of your factories are recognised unions, both here and anywhere else?
So in the UK, not just factories, we have a warehouse. There's around 4,000 people in Barnsley. That's got a recognition agreement with Community Union, and I believe that's an active engagement. It's been for about 18 months, over 1,000 members last time I checked. Within our manufacturing supply chain, we signed the GFA with Industrial Law sometime in the last 12 months. I do not know the take-up of that, but it's kind of one of our terms of trade. We actually want and encourage freedom of association for workers. As I was saying to Madam Chair earlier, it gives us extra eyes and ears to ensure our auditing techniques are secure.
Can I go on to Carol? Yeah, Carol, sorry.
On unions, we don't currently have a union in our Burnley warehouse. We do have...
Why is that?
There's no real reason for it, in all honesty. We have an employee forum.
And would you recognise if the workers came together?
If the workers would like it, yes, of course.
It would be recognised?
Yeah. But there doesn't appear to currently be a demand for our current workers in our Burnley warehouse to require a union.
What about in other areas that you buy from, other places?
We would recognise unions in any of our supply base. There'll be multi-unions, I would imagine, across all of our suppliers, but I don't actually really have sight of those. But if they do have them, then we would recognise them.
I mean, it'd be really interesting to know. I mean, obviously there is a real concern across the industry about the fact that lots of workers are not unionised, and there are concerns that some retailers and buyers are not recognising unions. So if it's something you could follow up in a letter for us to get a sense of how much of your buying is covered by that would be really helpful.
Do that for you.
I wanted to ask you as well on the issue of the minimum wage. I mean, if we've got question marks about the minimum wage here in the UK, how could we be sure that the minimum wage is being paid in somewhere where you're buying from in Asia, let's say, in Bangladesh?
Well, I think it's more difficult overseas because you're relying more on third-party audits. Although we do have 2 China offices, production out of China it's a smaller part of our mix. But it doesn't mean it's any less.
But the person who's not getting paid the wage, it doesn't matter if they're one person.
Exactly. But what I mean to say is China's obviously huge, and we have our own offices in Shanghai and in Guangzhou.
But can you put your hand on your heart?
Those areas we can check. In the other areas, we are relying on third-party audits to be able to do that for us. obviously, when there's non-conformance in place, factories are exited.
So how often has it been brought to your attention that in those other factories, not the ones where you have your own people, that
it happens? Yeah, it's a frequent occurrence actually within Asia. If we find anything where anybody who doesn't get through an audit doesn't work with us.
So what happens if they don't get through an audit? What's
Well, it depends on the reasons for the audit and whether they're willing to actually change their working ethics. So we have in place a process where there can be lots of reasons for not getting through the audit. One would be minimum wage, one could be working conditions, one could be where the fire exits are. There's a whole...
Okay, well, let's suggest the minimum wage for a second.
But just for minimum wage, we'll work with them. What we have been doing
What does work with them mean? Does it mean, say, if you don't start introducing the minimum wage in a month's time, we're going to take our business away? Does it mean, do we need to pay you more so that you can pay your staff more? What does working with you mean?
It's a collaborative approach.
I'm sorry, I still don't understand what that means.
Yes, but in many, if you let me just finish, in many cases, what we've been helping our suppliers to do is to move them over to electronic payroll. So we have full visibility and traceability. I think Paul mentioned that in the UK. That also can happen overseas as well. So that's just one of the things that we can actually find traceability on. And we've certainly in the UK, we're not 100% there, but we're 90% in the last year or so of making that change within the factories that we use, which is really 50% of our production.
Okay, thank you, Nev, I appreciate that. Just going back to China for a second, though. You said a moment ago that actually it was quite a usual occurrence for an auditor to find problems in a factory.
Yeah.
And so you might suggest, would you like to shift to electronic payrolls? That's one way of dealing with it. But what do they have to pay for that? How does that work? And what happens if they say no?
Well, if they can't do it and they refuse to do it, then usually we have to make the tough decision to not work with those suppliers.
Usually or always? I mean, if you find in your chain an auditor who's coming to you to say there's a problem here, let's say on minimum wage... Yeah,
so the first stage is to say, this is open costings is a great example. What is the cost of making that garment? What is the fabric cost? What is the
Are there
shipping
any
cost?
examples where you've ended up paying more in order to enable a supplier to pay a minimum
Not
wage?
directly related to the minimum wage. It doesn't really work that way in negotiation when you're working with the Far East. It tends to work as the price doesn't work for us, they don't want to take the order. And, there's a case, well, what margin do you need to be able to comply to all our standards and our contracts?
So if they are not able to meet your requirements or the minimum wage or whatever you're auditing them for, the bottom line is you will end your
we would end the relationship with them, yes.
Yes, unions, sorry.
The unions, in terms of our own head office, we're not unionised. In terms of our fulfilment centre, as ASOS, that's actually our fulfilment centre is run by XPO and they are unionised.
So the head office isn't?
No.
And is there, if workers wish to, would it be recognised if they wanted to?
I wouldn't anticipate there would be any issues at all. I mean, our people team are all about worker collaboration, worker engagement. We have regular forums where people can discuss issues. If there was a move towards recognising a union worker that head office colleagues wanted to be part of, I cannot see that would be an issue within our business.
Can I just ask Ms Kane, how many workers do you have in Burnley in the warehouse?
There's currently, you're asking at the time of the year when we have the most, there's probably about 2,500 currently because of the peak trading that we're going through.
And can I just ask you about fines to suppliers for late deliveries? Do any of you issue fines to suppliers if orders are late?
We don't fine, but depending on the degree of lateness, there is a course of action that might follow. We allow a supplier plus or minus 5 days tolerance to the date stated on the purchase order for delivery. After that, there is a course of action. So if it was a sea freight shipment, that started to slip, then we would ask them to air freight in a portion at their cost to get us into a stock situation while the balance of the stock came
at their
by
expense.
sea, at their expense, while the balance came by sea, which we would pay for. But if it got to, say, I think it's 21 days late, we reserve the right to cancel a purchase order.
At their expense.
At their expense.
Ms Kane?
I'm not aware of any fines that we have in place. I'm going to check that and write to you if I can think of any. But as far as I'm concerned, no, because going back to a lot of our supply coming out of the UK, we're very flexible because we understand sometimes lateness on an order may be because of something that we've done or got wrong at our end. That can happen, or we may have asked a supplier to prioritise a different style over another, which indirectly may cause some lateness. So it's been very collaborative to date, certainly with our UK suppliers.
We don't find suppliers.
Okay, so the person who anonymously told me that one company is making up to £2 million a year from fines to suppliers, it's potentially misguided then, isn't it?
It's absolutely not us. We do not use supplier charges as any form of income stream whatsoever.
Do you know who does then?
I don't know. That's certainly not our business practice. And I will qualify when we were talking about supplier lateness. That's about lateness that is directly attributable to a supplier. If we were to rephase that stock, push it back, bring it forward, then that would be at our cost. So, and we do not fine suppliers. We have just rewritten, it's here, our supplier directory, which is a full A to Z of everything that a supplier needs to know to supply misguided. We state in this document that we do not use charges, punitive charges, as an income stream for our business. It is categorically not our practice. That is not us.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
I've heard a couple of the buzzwords this morning. I've heard the issue of sustainability and the circular economy, and we certainly know what they are, but I haven't heard a great deal of evidence of their existence. I just refer to one issue that in the Mail on Sunday, I understand that Mr. Smith, your chief executive, said that half of the products are flown into the UK from Southeast Asia rather than shipped. In addition to that, we've heard evidence from Nottingham Trent University that describes the fast fashion industry as one that it generates excessive waste, produces plastic pollution and carbon emissions, and it demands a high throughput of garments and implies a linear economy. And that's certainly what I've heard this morning. And indeed, I recall in the 1990s when Gerald Ratner described some of his products, and I'd say particularly things like £5 dresses satisfies that category within the fashion market. So I've heard a lot about what you were doing working with designers, but I particularly want to know what you're looking at in terms of pre-consumer textiles. Because we had Phoebe English who came to speak to us, and she said that she would have been unable to find anyone who could take any of her offcuts, and indeed she said that every article that can be found on Oxford Street would have produced offcuts. So no one's actually spoken about that. I've heard it mentioned by Mr. Bainton, but I haven't heard any evidence of what happens. And secondly, Ms. Kane, you said that there are drop-off points for your goods. But where are they? How much do they collect? Where does that go to? Is it recycled? Is it retraded? I haven't heard any evidence so far.
So it is all upcycled, recycled, put into charity shops and third world with Regain. That's the
By
policies.
you?
I'm sorry?
By whom?
By Regain.
By Regain.
By Regain.
Yes. Yes.
And they know it's all your product.
It's not it's encouraging consumers to drop any product, not just our brand, but any product with them. In return, the consumer will receive vouchers to use. So it's encouraging a consumer to dispose of unwanted goods ethically.
But what I'm asking is how much of that percentage is your product?
Oh, I really couldn't say. It's very new. It's very new.
So you don't
For
know?
us, I don't know.
So it could be, sorry, Mr. Smith, it could be Paul Smith in Nottingham, it could be Ralph Lauren. You don't know, it's your product.
That's being dropped off at these.
Yeah.
That would be an impossible for me to answer.
You just don't know, okay.
No, I think it's impossible for any brand to answer that.
Right.
Because we do not know how long any of our garments stay in anybody's wardrobe, be it years or months or whatever. That's not visible to us today.
That would be my understanding.
Yeah.
Can I go back to one of the things you said earlier? So, no evidence of buzzwords like circular economy. Let me finish off what I was saying and give you some evidence as well. Circular design I've already told you about on that, and you particularly talked about offcuts. We haven't got a scalable solution globally for offcuts yet, but this starts with actually how you cut the pattern to minimise the wastage. That's in everyone's interest. One of the things, we have a factory in Kenya, which is part of the ASOS Foundation, and it currently has just under 80 single mothers making garments for that region. They've come with a really neat solution where the offcuts there can be used for toys for children in the area and for sanitary wear for young women in that area. We call that Couture Initiative. So we found an interesting way through the ASOS factory to use offcuts. But there's more we can do on all of that. But it starts with minimising waste first. On sourcing sustainable materials, I started to go through this. We're 80%, we'll be 100% shortly. Responsible manufacture we've talked about. This is the circular loop for us. Informing and guiding customers, I need to do a hell of a lot more, and I know I can. So I've got 23 million followers on social media. We started doing that, and there's a lot more that I can do and will do. Why? Because it's business critical to us. Fashion with integrity, as I said earlier, isn't optional. The consumer today holds brands accountable for taking care of these things for them. So I think it's really important that we lead on that. And that's part of the ASOS Fashion Integrity Programme. So that's something I need to get better at. Recycling, reusing. Interestingly, we've got 18% of ASOS denim right now is recycled. So the fabric of the denim is recycled. Denim is one of the highest users of cotton and water, average 2,500 litres per pair of jeans. So 18% takes away just per 1,000 litres of water per pair. That's where we are right now. By next year, we'll have 100% of the ASOS denim range is through recycled, more sustainable material. So you can do this with the right fibres. Interestingly, we've got a range of lingerie that we've just developed, ASOS branded lingerie, which is from plastic bottles. So we found someone to take the plastic bottles and create a fibre for us. We've also got a ASOS swimwear range, which is which is actually recycling fishing nets and using that to get back into prime material that we can do something with. In total, that represents 5% of the garments I make, and it's not enough. And as I was saying earlier, the availability of those fibres is hard. And so we're trying to find more people and incentivising them with demand. But that's something that's a problem. Now, on getting garments back to the UK, the take-back schemes, I think, are a good idea. But actually, to incentivise consumers, it also needs many options and convenience to give people the choice. There's a model in Germany that we're currently looking at that I think is really useful, where local authorities do a combination of curbside collection and separate garment bags to capture garments at people's homes, which is more friction-free for them. So anything that's friction-free has a better chance of consumers adopting it. Someone mentioned earlier about online taking back garments. That's quite tricky because the model requires shipping things around. We don't have a physical presence. And I'm trialling it in London. I've committed to trial it in the UK and Germany. I suspect the findings might be disproportionate carbon consumption versus what I would be able to recover. But we'll find out. So those sort of other options are a better way of closing that loop and making the circular economy work.
Okay, that's useful. I'll cut you off because I presume there won't be too much difference. That's useful, but it's not as tangible as I want it to be. Yeah. So one of the questions, or my next question I want to ask is about, we know currently about the number of plastics plastic particles going into the ocean. But there are industry initiatives to reduce that, particularly through washing, whatever. So are your respective organisations, have you signed up to any of those initiatives? And we'll start with Mr. Smith.
We haven't as yet. For us, this is a very new thing. It is particularly applicable to us because 70% of the products that we sell are made in polyester. Cotton features far less heavily in our ranges. However, just kind of touching on that point, but also some of these other points that have been addressed, we do also have a slightly different business model in terms of the volumes that we sell and the quantities. For us, the majority of products that we sell, we buy 300 units of. There's an awful lot of our range where we're only commissioning 150 pieces of anything at any one time, which means that in terms of materials, we actually buy from stock markets, so we buy end of rolls. So in China, there are well-established stock markets, also in Leicester, where our manufacturers will go. They will select prints, plain fabrics that they think they will like. We can over-dye, we can change the look and feel of them. But essentially, we are using up end-of-roll products that is already there. That isn't quite the same thing as your question about what you do with the waste and the offcuts. But we are definitely, not always commissioning new stuff to be made. It's fabric and materials that's already in existence, similarly with trims. But of course, the whole microplastics and laundry thing is an issue. The one thing that we do know is washing at higher temperatures does have a propensity to increase the issue. We do state on our wash labels, wash at 30 if you possibly can. As I said, that message will be reinforced with the work that we're doing with Green Earth. But it's definitely something that we need to look at further.
Yeah, very similar to Paul, really. We're not signed up to anything as yet. Love to probably do more and take those ideas away. But our model's very similar in that it's we're also, and it goes back to the value proposition that we have and some of the loss leaders we have, where we've used end-of-roll fabric lines, and that goes into manufacturing where they have fabric they want to utilise for a price point. So in some ways, we're using things that may have ended up in landfill or given away. The offcuts is a very interesting conversation and a very new one I started having just a couple of weeks ago with some manufacturers, and currently within Leicester, they have to take all those offcuts. There isn't a collection service for them. So they take those and they end up in landfill. So I was working on some costings with some manufacturers to say, well, what would it cost you to be able to recycle those offcuts? And they're largely are polyester out of Leicester. They were quoting some not huge amount of money actually for some machinery that would be shredding those for a secondary purpose. So that's something that we're currently under investigation. I'm in Leicester next week to pick up that conversation with that particular supplier as to what we can do to help in terms of that all of those offcuts not going to landfill and how they can be recycled.
Mr. Bacon, can I keep you on the oceans?
Sure. 100% of our plastic bags, of which 60 million were shipped last week, are recyclable, and 25% are recycled. We're currently working at improving the rate of recycled elements in that. ASOS head office, we've banned plastic, and so you will not find any of these in ASOS. They're all encouraged to have their own water bottles, and there's also plastic lurking in places you don't expect them, such as inside coffee cups, because that is a plastic. So everyone gets their own keep cup and incentivised to do so within ASOS. Something we're very proud of, something the ASOS team are very passionate about. Within our other packaging boxes, 8 million were shipped last year. All of those are recycled, and all of those are made from recyclable material as well.
So can I ask you then, within the next year, if you would subsequently write to this committee, can you confirm that you will sign up to an industry initiative that will reduce the amount of plastics going into the oceans?
I would be delighted to, but let me tell you, the progress we've made has nothing to do with starting up an initiative. It's something we felt was important, but I'd be delighted to commit to an initiative.
And Ms. Kane?
I concur, I'd be delighted to.
Mr. Smith, I wouldn't expect you to, but I'm sure that Mr. Passy is watching. and he can make that commitment to us later?
I'm quite sure that on behalf of Nitin, I can make that commitment now. We will sign up to something.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I actually detected a degree of enthusiasm from Mr Beaton about green things, which is very encouraging indeed. And indeed, it's no surprise that ASOS are the only members of today's panel who've signed up to the Sustainable Clothing Action Plan initiative. And I think you've slipped into your evidence how well you're doing in terms of sustainable cotton, 80% moving to 100. Could you give us a bit of a heads up as to where you are on water use reduction and CO2 reduction?
Yeah, so we've reduced CO2 by 12% in the last 12 months. I can't recall the actual target for that, but we've reduced by 12%. Waste we've reduced by 1.5%. Water we've reduced by 5%. We have a target on water to get to 15% by 2020, and I can't recall the other targets, but I can confirm them later.
20% on carbon.
There we go, thank you.
Okay.
But the targets are what we've submitted to the to SCAP. You know, our role in these is just to go far further, because this is just the right thing to do.
I suspect that Mr Smith and Ms Kane have worked out the next question is that why haven't you signed up to the SCAP process?
I believe we are in the process of, and we're waiting to hear back. So hopefully in the coming weeks we will be. But all of those other targets, we also have targets in place. I couldn't be able to tell you what they all are and where the savings are. They are in the annual report, and I can write to you with that report and give you that information.
For misguided, I would say that just purely due to our size, we can only do so many initiatives, in one go. It's not been a focus in this financial year. It is something that we've pledged to look at towards the latter end of next financial year. So it's on the radar, but we need to finish off and get under our belt some of our previous initiatives. At the moment, we've got a big initiative on plastics ourselves, in terms of the polybags that our products are packed in, and the dispatch sacks that we use, bringing in a global standard. We're working with Minetti on that. It's a programme that I've had in place with other retailers I've worked at. It's very successful. So that at the moment, that's the top of our agenda, and then we can move on. Once we've landed that, we can move on to other things.
Okay, well that's encouraging. Indeed, that there's a lot of, as well as the big operators, there's a lot of startup companies in this area because it's so accessible via the internet. In fact, there's one in my constituency called Silk, whose t-shirts are 30 quid each, quite expensive t-shirts, but I shall certainly be going to see them and ask them if they're aware of these. They probably aren't because they're such a new business. What was actually occurred to me, and you might be able to help me, is in terms of the consumer who wants to be green, is it better to go to a shop like Marks and Spencer's, where you've obviously got the heating and the distribution and also a lot of surplus stock at the end of a range, or to go to an online retailer where you've got the delivery cost, you've got the flying stuff from the Far East? Has anyone ever worked out which is greener to do? Because I think consumers might be interested to know if they're helping the planet by going to their local store or actually going online.
If I could just chip in there. Going back to 50% of our production being in the UK, 80% of that fabrication is actually knitted in the UK. So it's really the yarn for the fabric that's coming in from Asia. And 50% of the sales being UK, really on the carbon footprint of a garment, of how it's travelling, is probably a lot lower than some of the very large bricks and mortar stores.
So do you air freight stuff in your company?
Very small amount, because there's a small amount of our production is Asia now.
Yeah. I think, Mr Smith, you air freight some of your...
We do. I think the figure that was quoted in the Mail has been embroidered on somewhat, because it is not that much. But it is part of our costing model. It depends very much on the product type, because with air freight you pay for air freight by weight, whereas shipping is by volume, so you would not be able to afford in any case to air freight in on a regular basis denim product or heavyweight coats, etc. It's not sustainable, either ecologically or from a cost perspective. It is part of our model, but we would argue that given that 30% of our production is in the UK, that is offset by the fact, as Carol said, that the fabrics are largely from the UK, they're not imported. And it's a 2-hour road journey to our fulfilment centre up in Manchester.
And finally, turning to what our recommendations may be, is there more the government could do to assist you as you try and improve your environmental footprint, improve your use of sustainable materials? Is the government doing enough in terms of information, or do we need legislation, or do we need more promotion of voluntary initiatives?
I think on the whole fabric issue, that is quite complex. There's been a number of different trains of thought over the years. First, cotton was seen to be a more environmentally friendly way to go, but then we know that there's use of heavy pesticides, it takes a lot of water. Then we've moved to synthetics and man-mades, and now there's an issue coming to light with those in the terms of microplastics. There's also a moral issue as well. I mean, only this week we've been approached by PETA to ask us would we sign up to not using wool, period, in any of our products because of inherent cruelty within the wool producing industry.
That'll be popular in my constituency.
Which then says, okay, well, if we don't use wool, then the alternative is the synthetic, so it's back to acrylics. It's quite complex. The chair spoke earlier about shoddy, and that was a well-known industry. It's a lot easier to repurpose, recycle single fabrics when they from a natural origin. As when you move to synthetics and you start moving into blends, so you throw some elastane in there, etc., it becomes more complex. So I think definitely more research needs to be done into that area, and that can't be done by any one body. I think that's a collaborative approach.
I hope you'll point out to your customers that the best thing you can do for a sheep is to shear it in the summertime, and the worst thing you can do is have cheap wool that nobody can afford to shear them, particularly in the developing world. So it seems rather a strange development, but I suppose we're going to have vegan clothes as well as... So about the other two, in terms of government intervention or help or assistance?
Sure. These are my perspectives. Often I look around for silver bullets to solve business problems for me. They never exist. And often when I look around, I find comparable models and solutions that just need greater traction. I heard the earlier, so this is my observation, I heard the Modern Slavery Act called out earlier, so I won't repeat that. I think that's a great thing, and taking it further is good. Greater enforcement is great. Transparency is one of those things that help people to account. The Better Cotton Initiative, I think, is brilliant, and it's something we're very passionate about at ASOS. So I think something to encourage transparency around sort of initiatives like that is really important. SCAP, Sustainable Action Plan for Clothing, that is aiming at most of the subject matter we've been talking about today. It's been useful for us, it's given us a benchmark. I think that's something that needs a bit more traction. Incentives rather than penalties and options normally work better to shape behaviour. I would say that, but that's my experience. And I would look to, again, what I said earlier about the German model. They have a culturally much higher adaptation to recycling, and there are greater options with business and local authorities to make it a bit more easy for the consumer. It's inconsistent in the UK now, so that's something that I think would help. Those are the things that, and also brands actually need to start, once it gets to the accountability and transparency, we can start and should start talking more responsibly to our consumers about what we're doing, where we are, what the next stage is, what our journey should look like.
Okay. I'll just ask you about the, sorry, did you want to come in? Did you?
I was just adding on to that final point. I mean, I see it from two ways, education and research. So educating, and where the government can play a part in it within campaigns of educating a consumer to be more sustainable. I think we have a responsibility as brands, but I think we all have a responsibility to do this. And the other area is the availability of new fibres and new development at research level. Post-war, I don't know of many new fibres that have come into the market. I'm not that old, by the way. I was born in the 60s, not in the 40s. But, has there been development? So I would say initiatives for us to go back to the research labs and actually develop new fibres which are more sustainable for the future.
We need biodegradable clothes that after 5 years just disappear.
We have a joke in the office that should we all be wearing leaves?
There is banana cotton being developed, so you can eat your shirt at the end of it.
Certainly make for an interesting select committee hearing. Can I just go back on the environmental impact and the social impact of your Tier 2 suppliers? I mean, are all your garment factories audited at least once a year by an independent auditor? Yeah.
At the moment, we're only on Tier 1.
So,
yeah, Tier 2 is the next stage for us.
We've got down to Tier 3, we're currently mapping, and the answer is yes, we're currently mapping Tier 4, which is farms.
Okay.
We're Tier 1, Tier 2.
So you map Tier 2 as well. So that's the hangers, the tickets, the labels.
Yes.
The machine, yeah.
And okay. And how do you ensure that your nominated suppliers are actually being used and they're not being subcontracted out?
Well, we do give all our nominated suppliers, and obviously that's within the audit, and they check that they're coming from the source and the invoicing of the supply chain throughout.
We had a subcontracting amnesty, sort of like Declare, so it wasn't hide and seek.
When was that?
That was about 18 months, 2 years ago, and we did that to actually go, we really need to know, and so declared an amnesty, and then we started to make sure we go and audit one of those two. If people then, it's unauthorised in our terms and conditions. If people don't comply with that, we have a conversation and an improvement plan, an education plan, and then if they don't comply, we end up having to, and show no aptitude to change, we end up having to have a conversation about the future tenure with the business.
Okay, so is that, you say it's a conversation, is it an email conversation?
No, it's always
income.
No, this is face-to-face. I've had some of those conversations, yeah.
Okay, what about you, Mr. Smith?
We're about to go through a systemic change. We've recently brought in a new purchase ordering system. No contract can be brought into the into our business without an official purchase order because it links up to our warehouse receipting. But the
were you not using official purchase orders before?
We've always used electronic purchase orders, yes. But the point I was about to go on to make, the new system that we've moved to now facilitates actually listing the manufacturer as well as the supplier. So suppliers do have multiple manufacturing sites, of which we have visibility of. Those sites going forward will be listed on the purchase order. So that will then help us, particularly overseas, when our freight forwarder goes to collect product. If he's directed to an address that he doesn't recognise, that can be flagged back up to us to say, actually, there's something amiss here. So first line on the purchase order will be the supplier, and then the second line will be the manufacturer's address.
So to be clear, you're at Tier 1 audit and you're rolling out to Tier 2 by when?
We'll be looking at Tier 2 in the next financial year.
So April 2019. Ms Kane, you're at Tier 1 and Tier 2.
Yeah.
And
we're at 3 going to mapping 4.
You're going to the farms, okay. We're going to have to draw it to a close. It's coming up to 1 o'clock. Thank you all very much indeed for your attendance today. Order.
Portcullis House, the Thatcher Room.
Parliament Audit Committee, Thatcher Room, 27th of November. Environment Audit Committee, Thatcher Room, 27th of November.